If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever had a true missing 411, glitch in the matrix, parallel world, portal, or time slip experience in the woods or outdoors? What happened?
My own 411 type of disappearance experience while camping at Montesano State Park. I had a terrifying experience while camping in Huntsville, Alabama, with two people, a friend named Brian and my boyfriend, John. We had a 4-man tent that John and I were staying in, and our friend Brian slept on a cot outside between the fire and the opening of our tent. He was literally just 2 feet in front of the zipper door of our tent. The third night we camped there, John and I had gone to bed at about midnight, and Brian set up his cot just a couple of feet in front of the zipper door to our tent, between our tent and the fire. John and I fell asleep, and Brian was sitting awake on his cot, as he was a night owl who always liked to sit up late at night. I woke up on my back, all alone outside. I looked up and saw the tops of tall trees stretching above me, and there was thick fog, and I was in the woods on the other side of the mountain, a couple miles from our camp. Brian said he never saw me leave the tent. I have always been spooked out in the woods camping, so if I ever used the bathroom, I always had Brian or John walk with me, as I never walked in the woods or out of camp. I'm just not the kind of person that walks in the woods alone, so there is no way that I just sleepwalked or got up and got lost. In fact, Brian was so close to the tent door he would have known if I had gotten out. I ran up the mountain and through the woods for about 2 hours, screaming with my hands in front of me through the fog. I kept hearing something running beside me and behind me. It ran side to side, snorting as it ran and making noises as if it got closer and farther. It seemed to be running after me at times, yet I could tell it was faster than me. I was so horrified, and adrenaline had taken over. I ran the entire way for over 2 hours. I ran upwards on the mountain. I had to go through thick underbrush and zigzagged around cliffs and creeks. The forest is very thick going up the mountain, and the top is flat. Eventually I reached the top as the ground flattened and I found pavement. I finally found a wooden number on a sign at the backside of the camp, which was about a mile from our camping spot, and I followed the signs with my hands, still running, to get back through the park. I walked up to our camp, and Brian was still sitting up on his cot with a blanket around him, and he was so shocked when I walked up because he swore I was still in the tent. There is no way I could have left the tent without him knowing. It was like something fast and silent abducted me. So weird. There was a skylight in the top of the tent large enough for a person, and silly as it is, I wondered if something lifted me through it. Or was it another dimension? Or perhaps someone quietly snuck me out of the tent? Who knows? I believe there is something that we cannot understand hunting people in the woods. Why it didn't kill me is beyond me, but I recall the panic of waking in the woods on my back and running. It felt the whole time as if something was after me, but it also ran at my side and around me as well as behind me as if it was letting me know it had me if it wanted. I was not alone, and I wasn't human, whatever it was. It was also big. The memory of it haunts me to this day. I just found the 411 books and Mr. Ballen's stories about missing 411 cases online, and I couldn't believe it. I feel like I was in terrible danger, and I have no clue why I'm still alive. I would love to know everyone's thoughts about what happened to me. Thanks and blessed be to all of you. I didn't exist for an entire afternoon when I was 16. This happened in 2009, when I was 16 years old. It was the first weekend of summer, and nobody was home when I woke up at around 11 a.m. I grabbed a snack and went down to the basement to watch TV. I had plans to hang out with a friend at 3 p.m. that day. Like I said before, I started watching TV at around 11, knowing I had 4 hours before I was supposed to head over to my friend's house. I had only been watching TV for about 30 minutes when my mom came down the stairs asking me where I'd been all day. I said, "What are you talking about? I've been awake for less than an hour." I look at my watch and see that it's well past 5 in the afternoon. I run upstairs and check my phone to see that I have several missed calls from my friend and my mom. My mom's side of the story is what makes me nauseous when I think about this, even to this day. She was with my little brother at his baseball game from 1 to 3 that day. She and my brother were home when I supposedly woke up and went down to the basement, but neither of them have any memory of even seeing me that morning. When my mom got home at around 3, she checked the entire house for me, including the basement, where I had been sitting on the couch watching TV. It's been 10 years, and I still have no idea what happened on that day. It is by far the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, and although I talk about it with my family like it's a funny little thing that happened, it genuinely chills me to my bones thinking about it. Mysterious light behind me when driving home from work. For a bit of context, I work in a pub, so I work late hours. To get home, I have to drive down a country lane for a few miles, which leads to a T-junction onto a main road where my house is. There are no other turnings or places to stop until the T-junction. It's just huge bushes and trees on the side of the road. So I was driving home one night, gone midnight, pitch black as there's no lighting on the lane, and I see this light behind me. Obviously that's completely normal, I'm not the only one on the roads at this hour, but it is uncommon, but it was a singular light rather than two car headlights. Okay, fine, it's just a motorbike then. However, I've never seen a light like this at all. It was so bright it lit up the entire inside of my car, and I could barely look in my mirrors. It was so bright. There was also no noise that I can recall. I was almost home at this point, it only takes less than 10 minutes, so I just carried on driving with the doors locked. So I get to the T-junction, where the main road is, and I think, finally, some street lighting so I can see what was behind me. I turn left to go home, and I quickly look behind me at the T-junction, as the light was a little bit behind me, so it would have taken a second or two for it to reach the junction, but there was nothing there. Nothing ever came to the T-junction, and the country lane looked dark, so it's not as if it stopped/pulled over because surely the bike would keep its light on to see and so others could see it. It was like the light completely disappeared. I only looked away from it for a few seconds as I checked the junction and made the turn onto the main road. I went down that road again the next morning, and I didn't see anything wrong with the road or the hedge. I still wonder what/who it was. Camping in another universe. This is one of those things where I don't care if people believe me or not, it happened. Do with this what you will, I just want to talk about it. My wife and I went camping a few years ago. Where we go, the forest is pretty thick, and it's not terribly populated. On a busy day, you might pass a couple of people every 30 minutes or so. We saw an older couple in the distance, about 75 yards or so. They looked at us and waved. I remember thinking that the couple resembled us a bit. When we turned back toward the camp, the group passed by us. The woman said hi, and the man nodded. My wife and I stopped dead in our tracks and looked at each other, then right back to them. It was us, maybe 25 years older. I thought that it might be just a crazy doppelganger situation. At this point I could see them turn their heads and talk to each other, so we got a good profile of them. I was convinced we, or they, had traveled in time or to another universe, but my wife, practical and logical as she is, shot down that idea. I asked her if we should catch up and talk to them to see just how uncanny the resemblance was. She suggested we follow but not talk to them yet. We were almost to our camp, and we had planned to pass it and keep up with them. We still had an hour or so of daylight. To our shock, they turned down the short path toward our camp. We sped up a bit so we could see what was up. Maybe they had a camp nearby or something. We were about 50 yards or less away, and we could finally see our campsite through the trees, just before the short path to it, where they were clearly making themselves at home. It will definitely be us in 20 or so years. We watched for a minute or so. They weren't breaking or damaging anything. The man had gotten out my sausages, and the woman put our percolator over the fire. We jogged around the corner so we wouldn't scare them and had a full view of the camp, and they were gone. Gone. There was no sign that anyone or anything had been present. The sausages were back in the cooler. The percolator in the tent was as cool as can be. At that point all logic went out the window for my wife. We've gone back since a few times. I low-key want to run into them, us, again. No, I absolutely want to run into them again. This one has loved living rent-free in my mind since a few years ago. My ex-boyfriend and I were driving back home after a nice vacation. He was up to drive our 8-hour trip first. He volunteered to do the first 4 hours, while I agreed to then take over for the rest. Let me clarify, there was no time change during the trip, it was all within the same time zone. The first half of the trip was flawless, and he drove straight through without stopping. We ended up at a rest stop after his 4 hours, and we gassed up and got fast food to go. I then was set to take over, and the GPS said exactly, almost to the dot, 4 hours. I began back on the road again with my energy drink and music. He said he wasn't tired and got one too. About an hour later, the time started going up little by little until it had added an entire hour onto maps. I inspected and saw there was a crash about an hour ahead of us, adding all of that extra time. We were originally supposed to get home at 6 p.m., but with the extra time, it now said 7 p.m. I thought, well, maybe it'll clear up and we can get back on time still. And that is exactly what happened, except it didn't. See, I kept driving nonstop. The crash cleared up by the time we reached that area. I never even once slowed down due to traffic. But the GPS never went back down after we passed through that area. We were both extremely confused by this and agreed maybe maps just didn't update back to the correct time. Nope. We still can't explain it to this day. We arrived back home at 7 p.m. that day. No stops. No breaks. No reroutes, as it is a straight shot on the interstate. No crash anymore. Just an added hour and more driving time on my end that neither of us could ever account for. My East Tennessee almost victim of the missing 411 story. I grew up in East Tennessee, and my second grade class went on a field trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We were hiking to see Little Duck Hawk Ridge and its Eye of the Needle to the northeast, and that's when I saw what I call the transparent mind control demon. On the hike I was walking with these two girls. I thought I was a ladies' man, and in the back because I was so cool. On the way up nothing really happened except I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye, but of course nothing was there when I looked. We ate lunch at Little Duck Ridge, and I couldn't eat from the sense of dread. On the way back down, that's when it really started happening. The girls kept talking, and I kept trying to catch this thing out of the corner of my eye. The dread kept building up as this thing kept popping up in the corner of my eye. Then that's when I saw this freaking thing. It was a transparent entity in a big humanoid shape, but then it flashed behind a tree. My heart rate sped up so fast my ears started ringing, and that's when I kept seeing it flashing behind all these different trees. I say flashing because it was running at superhuman speeds, and when I stopped watching it flash around, I noticed everyone was almost out of sight around the corner. I started panicking, the ringing got really loud, and I got confused. I started mumbling to myself and thinking to run back up the mountain, but deep down inside I knew the other way was the right way to go. I started jogging the wrong way and laughing to myself in a demonic sound. The whole time I felt fear building up, and I was so confused, not knowing what was going on. I was laughing and jogging in the wrong direction, but I couldn't control my body. It felt so strange and frightening. Then my two lovely girlfriends, I guess, noticed I was gone and came back for me. They said I turned around and didn't look like me, that I had black eyes. They said they had to yell at me like 5 times. What was wrong with me? I was so scared I just said, "Let's run." Still to this day confused about it, but I thank God for the girls coming back for me because my teacher didn't. Furthermore, did anyone know that the Great Smoky Mountains are a memorial to the Rockefeller Foundation? Missing time glitch, a story I've heard many times, and now it happened to my dad. Does anybody know if this phenomenon has a name or explanation? My dad travels across the country a lot. We live in Australia, and he frequents the long drive between Adelaide and Broken Hill. Once he was taking a friend of his up this road, and they stopped off at Borough for 10 minutes. Or an hour and 10 minutes, depending on who you ask. The way my dad tells it is this. He checked a clock, I'm guessing it was on a building nearby, while he sat to eat, and it showed roughly noon. His friend went to the bathroom, and when she returned, the clock showed 1:05. She certainly hadn't been in there for an hour. He checked his phone and even asked someone who had been sitting nearby what time it was, and everything indicated that an hour had passed in those 5 minutes. It would have been pretty hard to just forget what time it is along the drive. They were expected to be back in town by a certain time and were actively watching the clocks. Both of them confirmed that it happened. An entire hour just went missing. It wasn't daylight saving messing with them, it wasn't the right time of year, and it all changed around midday anyway. I've heard this story many times before. It often involves driving. Sometimes it's walking between places, like someone walks just down the street and loses an hour or two. It seems like a relatively common occurrence. The story very often involves a group of people who all experience the missing time together. The people always swear that no more than a minute or two had passed. I've not been able to find anything online, heck, I don't know what to search for. So does anyone here know about this? Any psychological explanation, maybe? Does this effect have a name? Big man. After watching the Missing 411 documentary with my wife last week, I have become engrossed in David Paulide's work. I ordered the first book in his series yesterday and can't wait to read it. However, my wife asked me to pause the documentary halfway through so she could share a story about an experience her cousin and other residents from her home village had last year in 2017. My wife has roots in Arctic Village, which has a native population of about 150 residents that live a mostly subsistence lifestyle located within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska. This village is about as far north as one can get in North America without visiting the northern coastal villages of Alaska. The nearest hub city is Fairbanks, about a 2-hour plane ride south, where we live. So obviously, this is very rural Alaska, but the Gwich'in Athabascan people have lived in this area for thousands of years and have adapted well to the land and animals for sustenance. Arctic Village kind of sits on a plateau in a valley surrounded by vast areas of lakes, marsh, and then beautiful rolling mountains. It is a freaking beautiful region, especially in the summer. And the village has beautiful foliage, bushes, and tundra growth throughout it. However, my wife's account was originally provided by one of her cousins who has 2 sons residing there. The story her cousin shared went like this. It was fall time up in Arctic Village in 2017. Her cousin's boys were playing outside around the house as they usually would be in the afternoon. I believe she called out to the boys to head in, and her 3-year-old started up towards the house while her teenager started up shortly after. When her teen reached the home, she asked where his little brother was, and he said that he thought he had already reached the house, as he just saw him walking up just a minute or so before. So they started to call out to him and look around, retracing the path the older boy thought he took. Minutes turned to 10 minutes, and so on. Now, everyone has a CB radio in Arctic Village, so she got on the radio and started asking around. More and more people started getting involved. Her older boy was even driving around on the 4-wheeler by this time, frantically looking for him. After about an hour or so, my wife's cousin was scanning around the lakes and marshes with binoculars and finally saw something far off in the distance across one of the lakes. It must have been about a mile to the other side of this lake through very rough, wet, marshy terrain. She had her teen drive the 4-wheeler over to check. After about 30 minutes, her 2 boys returned on the 4-wheeler. She just received the scare of a lifetime for any parent. Now her cousin mentioned a few things that didn't quite make sense to her. The 3-year-old was perfectly fine and didn't have a drop of mud or debris on him if he had trekked his way through the marsh to get there. It was also strange that he had traveled so far in such a short amount of time and without getting it all dirty. And he was missing his shoes for some reason, and they couldn't be found. But what was most troubling is when she asked her boy what had happened, he simply said that a big man had taken him. This was about all she could obtain from him, as he wasn't a big talker at this age. Why he was taken, why he was spared, and by what are very perplexing. But following David Paulide's work really does show some similarities to my wife's cousin's story. As a final note, the Gwich'in people in this region believe in the 9 or woodsman. It seems like every native culture has one. An entity that lives in the wild and is known to take children from time to time. But, thanks for listening, and please ask any questions if you have any. This subject is fascinating, albeit a bit scary, as I have young kids myself. I believe I saw someone with no face. This story happened about a year ago outside my apartment complex. I was hanging out with a neighbor who lives in building number 1, while I live in building number 4. Around 12 to 2 a.m., I decided to return to my apartment. There's an open entrance that comes all the way through the building, so one could exit either way. They both lead to open space parking lots. I usually take the back exit, but this time I went through the front because I could hear there was a party in one of the houses across the street, and I was curious. To add more context, when you step out of the building, there's a small hallway between the parking lots and the buildings. This connects the whole complex. Here's where it gets intriguing. The second I stepped outside, my entire attention went to someone that seemed to be sitting at the end of the hallway, about 2 meters from the entrance of my building. I really cannot begin to describe the feeling I had in my gut when I saw that man/figure. It was like a prehistorical sixth sense of danger. I decided to keep walking straight to my building instead of taking the back. I figured this way, at least I can keep an eye on that dude. Creepy things aside, it's not uncommon to see someone in the parking lot, but the whole vibe was off, plus it was pretty late, so I tend to keep my guard up. As long as I keep walking, I never lose sight of the figure. I start to get closer, and I can tell it's definitely a guy sitting down, but something seems odd. He isn't moving or responding to my footsteps or any other stimuli. When I finally get to the entrance of my building, I can finally take a better look at who's sitting there, and oh shit, that person did not seem to have a face. The face was blank, resembling just skin without eyes, a mouth, or a nose. In that moment I felt the most horrible sense of panic I've ever had. I gasped in fear and shock as I ran into the building and up to my apartment. From here you can still see the bottom of the parking lot, but by this point the building itself was covering my vision of where the thing was supposed to be sitting. However, I kept looking as I went up to see if someone passed by, but no one did. When I got into my apartment, I looked out the window down to the parking lot, and there was no one there. I know it was dark and late, and I try to believe there's a logical explanation for that, but I must say it was a creepy experience I won't forget. The road that appeared from nowhere. About 2 years ago, my partner and I, took my mom to her dentist appointment. She insisted that she go an hour away, even though we have 3 in our tiny town, so we set off to the valleys where her practice is. I feel I should explain that we live in South Wales, UK, and live about an hour away from the valleys in a tiny ancient town, but my dad is from the valleys originally and still has family there, so we visit often. We entered the postcode into maps, and the route appeared straightforward, unremarkable, and typical, consistent with the usual roads. Subsequently, it directed us to turn onto a small, narrow lane. None of us remember ever seeing the lane or it being there, but just gathered that we never paid any attention, given that we normally continued on down the road. Off down the lane we went, wide enough for a single car, and that was pushing it. My partner commented on how scratched up the car was going to be from the bushes brushing onto it, but we carried on our way. We eventually came out of the lane, and the only way I can describe it is that we were on the top of one of the mountains there. There was a single track, again barely wide enough for one car, let alone anything else, not a road, just a track. About 20 minutes into this track, we passed by a little cottage. I'm talking about a one-room up, one-room down building with a rickety old wooden door and parts missing from the roof. We were all intrigued but had to get to the appointment, so we carried on down the track and eventually came back to a normal road. We decided that we would go the same way back and have a better look at the cottage and surrounding area since none of us had even known it existed. On the way back we followed the road we came in on, but instead of maps recognizing the road we wanted to turn onto to get back to the little cottage, it rerouted, and we couldn't find it for love nor money. It's bugged us ever since, and we have asked, searched the internet and maps, and gone back up and down and around the place where the turning was, but we have never ever found it again. It was strange. When I was a child, my family and I took a walk along the beach during the middle of winter, as we tend to be somewhat unconventional in our choices. Halfway through the walk it started blizzarding fiercely, and we decided to head back to the car. On the way back to the car park, my brothers and I were complaining of being tired, hungry, and thirsty, but my dad, who was born and raised in the area, assured us that there was nowhere to buy food and drink anywhere near that particular beach. However, as we battled through the whiteout towards the car park, a building loomed out of the blizzard. The building was unusual, resembling an annex to a 60s/70s modern comprehensive school, a style familiar to people from the UK, and it was squeezed between four hedgerows on top of a long, flat sand dune, as if it had been there first and the ancient, haggard hedges had somehow grown up around it. Outside was a sandwich board advertising hot drinks and snacks, so we bundled on in. The place was packed. There must have been 4 or 5 dozen tables, and every single one was heaving with pensioners eating tea, toast, tea cakes, soup, etc. When we arrived, there were no other cars in the car park, and the nearest bus stop was in the village at the end of the track, a good few miles away, so goodness knows where all these old people had come from. The room itself was very strange. The tables and chairs were all mismatched and arranged around glass display cases on podiums filled with moldering taxidermied specimens of local wildlife, except many of the examples were either creatures who live nowhere near the sea, hedgehogs, badgers, voles, etc., or animals that aren't native or are very rare to the area, cormorants, avocets, plovers, etc. At the center of the room was a squared-off spiral staircase leading to the upstairs, which, despite having no curtains visible from the outside and being in the middle of the day in a bright white snowstorm, was pitch dark. In fact, it was so dark that we couldn't even see the top of the staircase banisters. We sat down, and my dad went off to get us some food. The oddest thing is that even at that age, I remember looking at the prices on the wall and being very confused because they were all in old money, with prices in halfpennies, sixpence, shillings, etc. It was an open-pass kitchen, and all the equipment behind it looked very old, or retro, I guess, as did the clothes of the very plump, happy women working behind the counter. When my father returned with the food, he was unable to cease discussing how remarkably inexpensive it was and how the woman who served him communicated using highly specific regional dialect expressions, which he believed had been extinct for several decades. He said it was like being a schoolboy at the tuck shop again. We ate our very, very generous and delicious tea cakes and hot chocolate, got back into our coats, hats, scarves, and gloves, and walked back out into the still raging blizzard. The whole time we were there, not a single other person entered or left despite many tables clearly having finished eating before we even arrived. We struggled to return to the car and, with great difficulty, managed to maneuver it back onto the track leading to the main road before heading home. In the following years, we returned to that beach numerous times. The building was not there. Not only was it not there, there were no signs it had ever been there. No rubble. No ruins. No footprints. No foundations. Even the ancient-looking hedges it had managed to squeeze itself into were gone. Due to the beach being on a long promontory jutting out into a major shipping channel, the area has been fastidiously mapped for centuries. Using my student historical archive access, I studied maps of the area from roughly every decade right back to the early 19th century, and according to them, there was never, ever a building on that site. Now, it may seem that I have become confused about which beach we visited as I have grown older. However, my dad, who was born and raised there, knew exactly which beach we were on, and the beach itself is very distinctive, a long, thin teardrop-shaped spit of sand extending across the mouth of a river estuary. I know it must have been that beach because I remember seeing the red warning beacons at the top of the suspension bridge crossing the estuary blinking through the blizzard. The place didn't exist. The place had never existed. I ate tea cakes and drank hot chocolate with my family in a place that simply never was. Time disappeared, my glitch story. Hello. I've been listening to all your stories, and I believe it's time for me to share my own. Every summer in southern Spain we celebrate Faerie, which is like an outdoor party, with bars built like boxes with no ceiling. So basically everybody is around the fairgrounds drinking and going in and out of the bars to dance, grab some drinks, etc. It was around 3 a.m., completely nighttime, and I and my friend were outside the bars having a smoke. My friend suggested going in to take a drink and see if we stay for a bit in that place or go looking at how the others are looking. Now this is when it becomes incredibly weird. My friend and I go inside the bar, all full with people dancing, and I mean the place is packed with people. We speak with the waiter and order our drinks, and we turn around and the place is empty. We turn around again to the waiter, and he is also not there, no one is. We go outside all shocked with our fresh drinks in hand. The fresh ice made it clear that the drink was just made at that moment and not hours ago. We look around, and it's freaking daytime. We looked at our phones, and it was 8 a.m. Turn around to the bar, which is closed. Workers were cleaning the street, no one was around, and every bar was closed. Bear in mind that the bars close at 6, so it wouldn't have made sense that it was later than we thought, because the waiters would still have to clean the place before closing, and literally 1 second before all this, the bar was full of people and drinks on the floor. My friend remembers everything in the exact same way I do, and we weren't drunk at all. I'm actually glad I have a witness, haha. My family's really old grounds. I used to stay with my uncles and aunts on weekends when I was going to university. They lived in North London, and my uni was in South London. My sister was staying with them at the time, so I would visit almost every weekend. They live on an enclosed plot of land with big black metal gates at the end of a long tarmac drive. One evening when I arrived, it was about 10 p.m., and everything was fairly well lit up from the streetlights. I was listening to music with in-ear headphones, but only one worked. When I got to the gates, I heard what was the obvious sound of horse hoofs on hard ground. The noise came from what I thought was in front of me, but as I was looking in that direction and there was nothing there, I walked back to the road and looked up and down it. The road is busy during the day, and you do sometimes get people riding horses on it, but never that late at night. As I couldn't see anything, I walked back to the gates, opened them, and proceeded through. On my right was a hedgerow with one bush shaking frantically. I stopped and tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but the night was dead still, and there was no way it could have been the wind. I carried on up the drive. Just past the hedgerow is a gravel driveway/parking area that goes behind the mansion house. By this point I had taken my one working headphone out and was staring at the driveway where the sound of shuffling stones was coming from. There was nothing there. These three things happened within the space of around 40 seconds to a minute, and all through it was super intrigued as to what was happening. I remembered checking in with myself and reminding myself that what I was seeing and hearing was real, so that in the future, when I tell someone about that night, I can be sure my mind didn't distort what actually happened. I told my uncle as soon as I got to his house. He got his flashlight, and we walked back to the gate to have another look. My uncle is very level-headed and rational. Everything was normal. He told me not to tell my sister, but stuff like that happened to him regularly. The grounds that my family lives on are very old. The mansion house that my two uncles and aunts live in was rebuilt by them when they bought the land in the 80s, along with the cottage that my other uncle and aunt live in. I have had other weird things happen to me there that I can't even come close to trying to explain. If anyone has any ideas as to what happened that night, I would like to hear them. Thank you for listening. So, this has got to be the strangest thing that's ever happened to me, and ever since it happened, I've been obsessed with stories of missing time. I was on my way to work one night. The time was 11:05 p.m., and I was scheduled to start my shift at midnight. I stopped at the store down the street for some cigarettes, which only took a minute. I had been texting a friend, and as I sent the last text message, it was 11:16 p.m., which was perfectly cool because it only took me about 7 minutes to get to work. I drove to work, listening to the radio, and it was quite a boring, repetitive drive. There was nothing unusual or out of the ordinary about the drive. I commute to work, pull in, and park. At that very moment I see my phone light up with a messenger text. It's my cousin who works with me on the same shift asking me where I was and if I was okay. I was like, huh? Then I looked at the time. It was 12:22 p.m. I was freaking out because I'm never late to work, and I had obviously lost an entire hour somehow. I went back into my text messages and looked at the last text I sent my friend, and it said 11:16 p.m., and I swear to you there was like some kind of a blurb, a visual horizontal blurb, and then the time read 12:16 on this message. It was crazy. Almost like becoming aware again. An actual shift of some kind, subtle but obviously noticeable. I went into work and apologized for being late. How could I explain that without sounding like a complete lunatic? Weeks later I asked to see the security footage of that night because I could not shake off the weirdness of it all. I wanted to see what happened when I pulled into the parking lot, and mostly I wanted to see what happened during the glitch, but my supervisor told me they only keep 3 days of footage at a time. When I told my mom, she was convinced it was aliens, but I didn't see anything weird at all on the drive, and I was completely coherent the entire time. But oddly enough, after that night I did see a red fireball UFO in the sky multiple times, hovering kind of low over the field where I worked when I would come in at 6 p.m. I saw it maybe 4 or 5 times. I had never seen it before then. The last time I saw this thing, I prayed against the principality, and it disappeared. No joke. So I really have no idea if it really had something to do with an alien encounter that I don't remember at all, or if it was just some crazy weird time warp. I do know one thing, the experience irks me to this day. Definitely something you don't ever forget. An injured dog disappeared. A couple of weeks ago my boyfriend and I, 32 female, were staying at my parents' house with our cats while my condo underwent some repairs. One of the days, I was standing in my parents' office with my boyfriend, talking to my dad. The office overlooks their front yard with a giant window. At one point I glanced out the window to see a large dog standing on the grass. He was walking slowly and was limping. I was startled and said I was going to help him. My dad told me not to because the dog would just keep coming back. I was very confused, as his behavior is not at all how my dad normally is. I argued with him a bit while watching the dog when it looked up through the window and locked eyes with me. I'm incredibly empathetic, and I felt his need for help. I immediately stopped arguing with my dad and told my boyfriend I was going to help, asking him to grab my coat and meet me out front. I threw my shoes on and ran outside after confirming with my dad that the dog had walked back to the front of the garage. The process took me under a minute. Once I ran around the front of the house, I could see the large paw prints in the snow. The paw prints led from the front yard to the middle of the driveway, and then they stopped. The dog was nowhere to be found, and no other people were outside on the street. I searched for the dog for a few minutes, calling out to it and looking under bushes. I couldn't find it. My boyfriend confirmed with me that the paw print stopped in a very strange place, the middle of a large patch of soft, wet snow. It looked like he'd been picked straight up, but there were no shoe prints nearby. I still wonder what happened, and I still am hoping he's okay. I saw my kid, but it wasn't her. Today, I spent time in my kitchen. I live in a small loft, and the smallest bedroom is about 3 feet from the edge of the island counter in my kitchen. I saw my 2-year-old walk from down the hallway, where I had last seen her, and into my daughter's room. I literally watched her for several seconds as she walked in my line of sight, into the room, and out of it. Something seemed off? But I was distracted with my task, so I just immediately told my 13-year-old, "Hey, Toddler in your room," so she could check it out. 13 was in the living room, which is joined to the kitchen area, so it didn't take but 20 seconds for her to get into her bedroom. She was like, the toddler isn't in here." So, we checked together, and she, Toddler, was still in her little bed that's in my room at the end of the hall, just vibing. Then it hit me. What was wrong? The toddler was wearing a pink footless zip-up sleeper today. When I saw her, she was wearing a teal blue sleeper with a popsicle print that she wears often. Being distracted, it didn't really click. Also, weirdly enough, she's a heavy walker, and when I saw her a minute before, she made no sound, which is probably why I noticed something off. She also seemed like her being was slightly muted color-wise, and it seemed like a soft image, almost normal, but slightly faded like a camera filter. Enough for me to notice something was weird but not instantly notice what whilst I was distracted. This was broad daylight, by the way. I wasn't seeing things wrong. I even saw her smile a little. I saw her clearly, but it wasn't her. I've got no idea what to do with this. I have no history of hallucinations, etc. I'm not having a mental break, nor am I sleep deprived. Everything else is mostly normal. However, this event did remind me that 3 or so weeks ago when my 13-year-old was home alone, she heard my toddler giggle in my living room even though we weren't home. Not many kids live in my building, but a few do, so I brushed it off as her mistaking someone in the hall for my kiddo. Now I'm not so sure. 1977, Catskill Mountains, New York. A hiker/hunter had spent many hours in these woods, he knew them well. About 100 yards into the forest that summer's day, things began to get strange. For a few seconds, while passing a large rock formation, he felt a tingling go through his whole body. Soon after, he began noticing that the environment had changed. The previously overcast sky was now sunny and clear. It seemed to be tinged with green rather than just blue. The country was now more open than it should have been, certain plants grew that shouldn't have been there, and there were large granite outcroppings that were not part of his hiking areas. There was a narrow canyon cutting into those cliffs. Convinced that he had somehow gotten completely lost, he trudged up the canyon. Then he heard pretty music ahead. Peeking around, he saw 4 little men sitting on boulders by a waterfall, playing flutes. Another one gathered water from the fall. Our hiker had a camera and used it. The water gatherer returned, the little folk got up, and moved off further up the canyon. Our hiker retreated the way he came with his pictures. Wandering about for around an hour, he suddenly spotted his car. Another tingling then hit him, and turning, the strange environment was gone. The tint of the sky was back to normal and overcast again. His watch said that 30 minutes had passed, but he felt that it was at least 3 hours. Back home, no one believed a bit of his story. The film came back with all pictures perfect, except of course for the ones taken in the other reality canyon. They were all dusty smudges tinted in a light green. My now wife and I were out on a night drive, probably around 10 p.m. I was driving down a 2-lane rural highway that passes through several small towns but a lot of farm/rural countryside. It's a very winding and hilly road in places, and as I came over a hill, on the other side, I saw a pair of legs wearing grayish pants walking across the road. What's odd about this is there was nothing above the waist, like my headlights were shining through air. I passed within 2 feet of it, as it was about in the center of the road as I passed. My mirror was probably 6 inches from it. I had my windows down, heard no one shout at me, and when we turned around and went back, after calming myself down, there was nothing there, no marks on the car or the road, and no one around at all. Let me back up. When it happened, my wife and I both shouted "What the hell?" or something similar. I immediately asked her, "What did you see?" She said, "It was just legs with no body." She used to do paranormal investigations and may be a little more sensitive to the paranormal but is by no means easily spooked. She was shook by seeing this. I asked her first, as I didn't want to influence what she said, and if she hadn't seen the same thing. I doubt myself. Neither of us was on drugs or alcohol, and we were not tired, stressed, or sleep deprived. I tend to think it was something from another plane of reality/dimension, or similar. My mom was almost a victim. Hi everyone. I wanted to share my mom's story. My mom grew up in Reappearing, Paraguay. For those of you who don't know, there seem to be a lot when I tell this story. Paraguay is a very small third world country. The area where my mom grew up is especially rural in the countryside, where most of the poor people were. Her house was located directly across from dense woods that extended for miles. One afternoon, before it got dark, my grandma and mom were outside. My mom was about 7 at the time when she spotted what she described as a beautiful little white baby chick. She's always loved animals and enjoyed catching them, so she wanted to catch one. It kept running away from her, even though it seemed like she was just about to catch it multiple times. After what seemed like she was running in a circle for minutes, my grandma came out of nowhere and yanked my mom's hair. My mom said at that moment she was broken from a trance, that the sun had already set, and she was actually very deep in the woods. My grandma smacked her really hard on the head and told her that El Pombero almost succeeded at taking her. My mom tried to explain to my grandma about the pretty little chick, but of course it was nowhere to be found. My grandma said my mom seemed to be playing normally and then all of a sudden just started fast walking towards the woods. My grandma thankfully ran after her and was able to catch up to her. I always contemplate what would have happened had my grandma not been there to stop it. I'm glad she was there. I saw my parents' doppelgangers. Okay, so I just recently came upon this community and figured I'd share this story with the hopes that someone has experienced a similar experience or maybe has an explanation. I have been experiencing so many weird glitch in the Matrix experiences recently. This happened to me about a month or so ago. I've been thinking about this experience a lot recently, and a friend of mine recommended that I share it on here. This experience has kept me up at night recently, and the more I think about it, the more unexplainable it gets. It was a Saturday, and I enjoy filling up my car on the weekend before the week begins. I needed to get gas, and before I left the house, I told my dad I would be back in a few minutes. I just needed to get gas down the road at my local Kroger, because it's 3 cents off the gallon lol, and would be back shortly after. Anyways, for some reason, I have an overbearing dad who refuses to believe I know how to pump gas on my own, even though I have been doing it for over 6 years. I leave the house to get gas, and as I mentioned, the Kroger is right down the road. I have to take a massive left turn to arrive into the area, so I like to drive all the way around to avoid that massive turn, aka making a 2 minutes drive into a 7 minutes drive. As I'm making the drive, about 3 to 4 minutes in, I notice my parents' car approach me and begin driving close behind me in my rearview mirror. Their car is unique, as the color is a specific light grayish blue. I roll my eyes, as I'm thinking, wow, they seriously think I can't get gas on my own and are following me to make sure I can. I approach a stop sign and quickly check my side view mirror to get a closer look to make sure it's them, obviously annoyed. In my mirror I see it as my parents driving. I know so intensely that it was my parents, like I know what my parents look like. There's something off, I notice, though. Their expressions are completely blank and just seem empty? I can't explain it, but it had to be my parents, but like all energy from them was gone. They looked like NPCs. I decide to shrug it off and continue driving the final stretch to Kroger. As I turn into the Kroger, I notice my parents are no longer behind me. I pull up to a pump and pull out my phone to check my parents' location. They are at home. There was no way they had enough time to make it back home from where I had last seen them on the road. I finish pumping gas and make my way home, still perplexed by the encounter. Later that night, I ask my mom in a laughing manner, "Hey mom, why were you and dad following me earlier?" She looks at me super confused and says, "What are you talking about?" I explain what I saw on my way to get gas, and she replies with, "Dad and I haven't even left the house today." I must preface by saying that my parents are incredibly religious, conservative, straightforward people and would not prank me like this. I know with absolute certainty that they did not leave the house. So please tell me who was following me? I saw something too. We were divided into 2 groups, consisting of 9 people altogether, and we were participating in the trekking portion of our bronze medallion, which involved a 3-day trek in bushland. On the first day everything went fine as we navigated our way safely to the first campsite on our maps, and as a collective group we all set up camp and hung around the fire eating dinner and chilling until we fell asleep. Throughout the night I randomly woke up with a chill in my spine. I waited roughly 10 minutes, looking at my watch and listening to the outside. I zipped open my tent and sat around the fire that was still burning. 2 other guys also heard me and came out too. Nothing too suspicious except for a paranoia that we were being watched and every now and again bush noises. We all went to bed after a bit of fruit. On the second day, we, the group of 9, made the decision to break away from the rest of the group of about 25 when we reached the second rest stop, longest walk of the 3 days. We thought about continuing, as we weren't tired yet, and carrying on with our momentum to arrive at the next campsite early. We thought about setting up camp quickly and starting a fire early for the rest of the group when they get there. Cook/drink tea/chill. Now here is the weird part. We, a group of 9, 4 guys, 5 girls, are navigating through the national park woods with the exact same maps and compasses as each other and the rest of the group we left behind. We are following the map until we come to a fork in the road. The self-appointed head navigator says we turn left, and everyone agrees. My mate and I look at our map, and it shows to continue on the same path and stay to the right. We disagree for a good 5 minutes. The head navigator says to look at the maps. We all compare maps, and they are all the same. That is 5 maps between us saying to turn left. My mate and I are very confused at this point. We both agreed we last saw the map tell us to stay right, but we just agreed and felt embarrassed that we read the map wrong and almost got the group off track. So we follow the new track for a good half hour without seeing any of the landmarks indicated on the map. The head navigator says it's just a long way. Finally we come to a curious roadblock, a huge tree trunk that has been cut and is blocking our path. We have the discussion, saying we have seen 0 landmarks, and no way would they want us to scale this fallen tree trunk. In this discussion to turn around, one of the girls says she will run back and see if there is anyone behind us. She leaves her bag and goes off. 10 minutes go by, and we start getting worried, So we all head back, hoping Jane hasn't fallen and twisted or broken something. As we are walking back, I get the chill up my spine again. Very unsettling, as we don't know if we are on the correct track, and the feeling of being watched comes back. We keep walking with no sign of Jane. I'm looking around to see if there is any wildlife around and see a dark humanoid figure running quickly through the trees. I point it out, thinking it's Jane, and start calling her name. Everyone thought I was playing jokes to scare the girls. The only two people walking behind me confirmed with me later they saw it too as I pointed it out, and it disappeared behind a tree. It ran way too fast to come to a complete stop. We all start calling her name as a group, hoping she is nearby, but we don't see her until we come back to the fork in the road. However, she came up from behind us. One small single track. She ran up it, so the only way she could have logically come back is in front of us. We tell her we have been calling her name for what felt like hours, and she claims she didn't hear anything. We walk up the correct route and make it to the official campsite. We get a raucous applause from everyone else there as we left early and arrived late. My friend and I are confused about the maps, the track, and then Jane as well. We compare maps with one of the other groups that made it early, and it's the exact same as before, indicating to follow the track right. They also said the left track had a chain across it that we never came across. We then talked to Jane. She claims she ran all the way to the start of the side track because she didn't see anyone along the way. A group was walking past when she got to the start, and they showed her that the map indicates right. I asked her about the chain, and she had no idea what we were talking about. She then said she ran all the way back to the block in the road to tell us, but we weren't there. She looked as shook as us, as she did not know how we got in front of her without us passing each other. And another strange thing was that no one else appeared to be confused about Jane coming up behind us, but we were all relieved she was all right. My friend and I were ducked up for the next day trip back to civilization, just going through the details over and over. I witnessed 3 people who were frozen in time suddenly resume motion. I'm really not sure where to talk about this, but my mind is absolutely blown by something I witnessed a few days ago. What I witnessed is beyond my comprehension. I have been working at a busy trade show for a few days, and on the last day I picked up a van rental and was driving to the venue. Business as usual, and I just finished a call with my boss as I was pulling up to the venue. The last stretch of road before my parking lot is typically very busy with cars pulling up to drop off people and people walking across the road from surface level parking lots. As I make one of 2 turns, I immediately see 3 businessmen frozen in place in the middle of the road crossing in front of me. They literally have zero motion, as if they were statues. Some had briefcases, others had their suit jackets open, and one was visibly half turned around, smiling as if he was laughing in the middle of the conversation. It was windy, yet no jackets moved. Those briefcases were suspended in the air but never swung on their handles. The one guy smiling and gesturing back had his legs open like a beetle on the Abbey Road cover. It was so bizarre because around this frozen group of 3, other cars were passing by, and people already on the sidewalks were in motion. This felt like an eternity, but probably within 4 seconds, motion suddenly resumed in this group. It felt as if someone had pressed play on a remote control. They kept walking across the street to the venue. The guy who was turned around to someone resumed chatting it up with his colleagues as he crossed the street. Briefcases, jackets, and other clothing items moved and shifted as expected. I was baffled. I have seen weird things like this shared online of birds frozen in the air or ladies walking on the sidewalk that appear to be glitched and always assumed it to be a hoax or clever editing. But once I saw this, my mind hasn't been the same since. I simply can't comprehend what I saw. Was I visualizing these people before they arrived at my destination when they resumed? Were they indeed frozen? Did anyone else see this happen? Was I simply too tired from working this trade show? And even if so, how did I see something frozen for so long before they essentially resumed motion? My head is spinning. I am kicking myself for not having installed a dashcam in the rental vehicle. Mid-1940s, Catskill Mountains, New York. There was a family gathering at a relative's home in the woods of the Catskills. The adults were mainly inside while the children were playing outdoors. While the others did whatever they were doing, Jill, a little girl of 5, became fascinated with the flutterbys, and no one noticed her chasing after them into the woods. Ultimately, the adults checked back in to find that she was lost. Many people searched many hours in vain, and dusk was coming, bringing a great deal of despair with it. Then, suddenly, a besmudged Jill came running happily out of the woods unharmed. What had happened? Once Jill had followed the flutterbys for a while, she lost them and realized that she was lost herself. She tried to find her way back to her aunt's house but only got deeper into the forest. She thought she heard someone calling for her, but it was too far away, and she couldn't get a direction on it. Finally she came into a small clearing. Feeling awful, she took a candy bar from her pocket, sat on an old dead tree, and ate a little. She felt lonely and started to cry. She looked up and saw standing at the edge of her clearing two small living dolls with silvery hair to their shoulders. They were dressed in shiny green clothes and had caps. She offered them some of her candy bar, but they didn't respond. Beginning to cry, she then asked them if they knew the way to her aunt's house. They nodded and motioned for her to follow. As dusk came on and the forest darkened, the little dolls became accompanied by small balls of blinking colored light, which illuminated the way. They all seemed to be going faster and faster as they went, and Jill was surprised at how fast she was moving. She said, "Like a sped-up movie." The dolls then abruptly stopped and pointed to the aunt's house. Jill happily turned to thank them, but they were gone. And she ran to embrace her parents. Missing 411, encounter with forest denizen and invitation to join them in their realm. Ms. Dorley and her friend were on errand apparently to get away into a more natural environment distanced from the noises of the modern world. They had, in fact, been practicing various meditation techniques and had acquired some patience and discipline in their application. These were not pursued in an attempt to bring about Faerie experiences, but, as it happened, the meditative state did just that, by surprise. Moira Dorley describes her meditation technique as seeing without looking. It is a sort of defocusing upon the nearby central object and looking beyond it, like attempting to focus not on the thing itself but as if looking several feet into the background. She and Peter had been practicing this sort of meditation for some time before any such elfin encounters came. And, as stated, they were not intended for such. The first instance came in the garden of their small house. A soft silvery light suddenly appeared, and through that, a procession of small figures walked towards her from the stream bank. It was led by a faun. The faun was small, about 3 feet, 90 centimeters, tall, and seemed pleased with himself. I saw short legs strutting with pride and heard tiny hooves clip-clopping on the paving stones. He had horns too, about 6 in, 15 centimeters, and a wrinkled face. He could have come straight out of a book of fairy tales or myths. The faun and his procession brushed past her, and she panicked and ran into the house, relieved that reality still ruled there. Peter then was able to see them, too, and described the faun and the procession the same way. The group had stopped further down by the stream and seemed to be having an argument about something. The other little beings were present, but only the faun could be seen clearly by our witnesses. Thus, the first experience came to an end. Other encounters began to follow and, needless to say, were riveting in interest. Ms. Dorley and Peter learned the old ways of encouraging Faerie encounters and began placing out little food offerings and making small round pebble shrines at streamside as welcome signs. I remember standing in the sitting room while a small figure dressed in mottled greens and browns looked up at me with an expression of sinister mirth. If he had been a child, his height would have put him at around 6 years old, but he bore no resemblance to any child I have ever met. His face, which was unusually long and well-defined, seemed like the face of one who had lived 1,000 years. Things gradually turned darker. Moira had an experience while walking along the stream with another sort of elfin-kind procession. These elves were tall and slender, with dull grayish hair. They wore striped green and brown clothing. They seemed to float rather than walk. Smaller chattering dancing imps accompanied them. She found herself walking with them in what seemed a bit of a trance-like state. We were soon inside a hall that looked as if it had been hewn out of rock. Uh-oh. There was a long table where preparations for a meal had been made. Again the imps tried to make me change my clothes, but I refused. The stripes stood very still, as if in anticipation. Perhaps they were waiting to see if I would sit at their table, which I couldn't bring myself to do. Then I heard the words, "You are the first person to come this way for 200 years. Come be with us." That seemed to shake her out of her fuzziness, and she turned away. Suddenly the hall was gone, leaving her beside the stream. She later described the atmosphere around these stripies as a languorous, dreamy air. Upon returning to the house, she discovered that Peter, too, had encountered these beings and had been asked to stay with them. The experience shook the two of them thoroughly enough that despite the excitement of these glimpses into another reality, they decided to no longer encourage contact and took down the stream pebble shrines. For the remainder of their stay, it was still difficult not to find oneself wishing for another encounter when walking in the woods. One day, another happened. Moira heard singing in the forest. She also had seen balls of light, which local people called the Faerie lights. But these had no close encounters. That autumn, however, brought an unpleasant encounter with what might be referred to as small walking trees composed of bare, withered-looking limbs. These entities crowded about and transmitted the opinion that she didn't belong there and should leave. Her last encounters were vaguer. The presences in the forest mists were almost focusable, but they were not quite clear. They were in part like will-o'-the-wisps in the sense of inducing some confusion and part poltergeist in creating cold spots in the air. They were not directly hostile, but not welcoming either. Mom and I lost each other. When I was about 8, I was on a walk with my mom and our family dog. Well, Mom walked the dog, and I rode beside her on my bike. We went down a bush track close to home, so it was very familiar to us both. The track had steps down from the road, a narrow bush track for about 400 meters, and then a large grass opening before a bridge to another narrow track on the other side. There were a lot of recognizable landmarks, so it was very near impossible to get lost. We came down from the steps and followed the track to the end, where we turned around to go home and came to the grass opening. I said to Mum that I would ride ahead and meet her at an odd-shaped tree near the bottom of the steps and wait. She knew the tree I meant and agreed. I went ahead and waited at the tree. A while went by, and Mum didn't show up. Like mentioned before, the track was only a few hundred meters to the opening, so I expected her to be right behind. I waited a bit longer. I would say I'd been waiting 15 to 20 minutes when I decided to turn back and find her along the track. I went all the way back to the opening and didn't see anyone, including Mum or the dog. I obviously called out for ages and rode back up to the tree and back to the opening, and nothing. It became such a long time that I didn't know what to do. I rode to the steps and waited for a bit before riding my bike home. I wasn't 100% sure that I should do that, but I figured that's probably what I should do. I got home and explained to my dad, who said it was the right thing to do. About an hour later, Mum rocks up home in a stranger's car, literally bawling her eyes out. She has been searching for me. She said she hadn't strayed off the path at all and came to the tree to meet me, and I wasn't there. She called for me and walked back and forth, and there was no sign of me. Eventually she went to a nearby house and asked them for a lift home. To this day, I'm 27 now, we both can't figure out what happened. It's impossible that we didn't meet each other on that path. A possible glitch or dimension switch? Who knows? Either way, it's unexplainable to us to this day. My experiences. Experience number 1. Story: I was in my mid-teens at a scout camp in the coastal mountains of Oregon, Camp Cooper, specifically. We and several other very experienced scouts were on an outpost camp, essentially an unsupervised overnight a handful of miles outside of camp. Anyway, there were, I think, about 6 of us. We had all grown up in scouts and had a lot of experience in backcountry travel and camping. So we arrive at a spot in a clearing that overlooks a large valley. There was nothing unusual about the surroundings. After several minutes of preparing our campsite, each of us was overcome with a distinct feeling of dread and fear. Each of us felt it immediately and distinctly. I remember very clearly feeling in danger and can still remember the feeling. This was over 15 years ago at this point. Essentially, we all looked at each other, pale in the face, and said, "Do you feel that?" We all agreed that we did, and we hightailed it on out of there and back to the main camp. Ultimately nothing happened beyond that, but I found it fascinating that everyone in our group had the same feeling of utter dread, coming on at the same time, in an otherwise benign setting. Possible explanation: unknown. Experience number 2. Story: out on a long trail run in Shenandoah National Park 2 years ago, and while descending the old Rag Fire Road from Skyline Drive, about a quarter of a mile uphill from where the junction is to turn left, I heard very loud stirring in the bushes to the runner's left. I experienced immediate fear and came to a halt. Silence. I can see nothing in the bush. It was summer, so everything is very thick, and hear nothing. I continue several feet down the road, and the stirring follows down the road in the brush. Again I stop. Silence. I move several more feet down the road, the stirring follows. Stop. Silence. I repeat this over and over again for about 200 yards until I reach a sharp curve, and that is the end of my problems. This situation stands out in that whatever was in the bush was clearly aware of me and moving when I moved and stopping when I stopped. It could see me, I could not see it. There are many bears in the park, and I have encountered a number of them, and this encounter was quite different. My experience with bears in the park has been A: the bear is far enough away off trail to not give two ducks about me and continues on its merry way. B: the bear and I mutually startled each other when I rounded a bend abruptly, causing the bear to turn and swiftly retreat into the woods. I have also experienced the distinct displeasure of being harassed by a mountain lion in the Mount Jefferson wilderness, which was quite different from my encounters with bears. Additionally, there are no longer any mountain lions in Virginia. So this experience on the fire road stands out to me. Possible explanation: strangely behaving wildlife. Case Arizona Mountains, in 1978. The woman reporting the encounter was a teacher at a college and, for purposes of this narrative, went by the pseudonym Dr. Jean Smith. She and her husband were camping in Arizona and hiked into the mountains, where nothing was to be heard except for the occasional calls of birds. I was standing in front of a wall of granite boulders of all sizes and shapes when all of a sudden I heard the most beautiful singing I have ever heard. There were no words, but the joyous music just kept on. I stood there rooted to the spot, entranced, hardly daring, literally, to believe my ears. The music came from the boulders. I looked around, and as I did, it was as if I became a truly genuine part of the universe. I had the wonderful feeling of sharing or being shared with. It was as if the sky above and the clouds, the breeze, the bushes, everything, realized I could participate. I felt somehow as if I really belonged. All restlessness in me was stilled, and I was filled with a glorious sense of peace and love. All the while, the beautiful voices singing from the boulders kept going. I really can't find the right words. No words can truly relate the wonder and joy of that time. The music and the singing kept on. Her husband, meanwhile, was completely mystified. He couldn't hear the music. All he could see was his entranced wife. He almost had to drag her away from the spot, not knowing what was going on. My dog was scared of something at the cemetery. In my town, there's a small cemetery near the main street. It's very old, and the people buried there died between the late 1700s and the late 1800s. By the entrance, there is a plaque listing the names of soldiers from my town who died in the Revolutionary War. It's a pretty cool piece of local history. Anyway, I have a 2-year-old dog whom I walk every day. I usually take her for a walk on my street, but after a while the same scenery can get old, so I decided to start walking her around my town where there's a sidewalk. We don't go every day, but when we do, she gets so excited to walk in a new place with a lot of new stimuli. The sidewalk through town takes us past this cemetery, and whenever I pass it, I like to stop and try to read some of the headstones close enough since the entrance is usually closed. I only stop for about 10 seconds and then continue walking. This past weekend, my dad decided to come, and we both took my dog for a walk around town. This time when we got to the cemetery, the gate was open. I think the town only opens it at certain times, especially because a few years ago some kids went in and vandalized it. My dad and I decided to stop in because I've never been in there before, and he wanted to show me some interesting headstones. When we got to around the second row of headstones from the entrance, I went to walk further into the cemetery, but when I looked back, my dog looked terrified all of a sudden, ears back, tail between her legs, and jumping on me for comfort. I had no idea what was wrong, and she would not go any further. My dad took the leash from me, and I went around for a couple of minutes to look at some headstones. I was only gone about 2 minutes, but when I came back my dog was so scared my dad had to sit on the ground to comfort her. So we decided it was a good time to leave, and when we got back onto the sidewalk, my dog was fine, just as excited as she was before. It was such a strange experience. My newborn sister was almost kidnapped by a being seen by my mom and aunt. Could this have been a possible missing 411 case? The first time was 22 years ago, when my mom was pregnant with my sister. She had a fight with my dad, and it was so bad she had to leave the house and slept at an old lady's house around the corner. She was 7 to 8 months pregnant, so the old lady, fearing my mom could go into labor because of the stress, stayed with her in the same room at the back of the house. They say it was around midnight, and they were about to fall asleep when they saw a shadow looking through the window. They stayed still until they heard the person walking away. My mom says she thought it was my dad looking for her, so they went to see through the window to make sure. They both say they saw a small man, covered in black hair with a small tail, walking away. Now, they thought it was a monkey, even though there isn't even a zoo in that city, much less monkeys, but that was the logical explanation, until they saw it turned around. They describe it as having a completely human-like face, like being a man, the only difference being its size, like a 5-year-old kid, but chubby and covered in hair. It stood there looking at them for maybe 5 seconds and then ran away. The next encounter occurred 4 to 5 months later, at my grandma's house, where my parents were living. They had built a room behind the main house. My sister was sleeping in her crib in my parents' room, and I was with my grandma and aunt in the main house. My aunt says my mom came to see if I needed something. I was 2 years/old, and asked my aunt to keep an eye on me because she was going to take a nap. My aunt said sure, and my mom left. My aunt says maybe 2 minutes had passed when she clearly heard the sounds of coins coming from my parents' room. I should say my sister had a sweater with tiny coins attached to it, so my aunt thought my sister was awake and went to grab her so my mom could sleep. She says she was walking to the room and saw the door wide open, When she came closer, she saw my mom lying in bed completely asleep, and next to my sister's crib was the same human-like thing trying to grab my sister. She screamed at my mom, and the being ran away to the backyard. She picked up my sister and said my mom was still sleeping. She had to push her for her to wake up. My mom did not tell anyone about her encounter because she thought that night she and the old lady were just exhausted and they saw that thing under the moonlight, not the best illumination. Yet, my aunt described this thing exactly as my mom did, small, chubby, and covered in hair, standing on two legs, and with a man's face. I forgot to add that my dad and two other neighbors ran after that thing. They heard it running through some bushes behind the yard but didn't find it. Alexa glitch or flesh pedestrian? Context: let me tell you a little about the layout of our house, from my perspective. If I turn left, I have a window with the blinds closed and curtains drawn, and if I open the window, I could see the porch where my dad was. If it turns right, I have 3 doors. The one on the far right is a closet, which is closed, the one in the middle is a bathroom, which is open, and the one on the far left leads to the rest of the house, which is also open. Go straight out the left door and you get another closet, turn right and you go to the bathroom, turn left and you go either up the stairs, on the right, into the living room, on the left, or towards the front door, far right, which leads to the dining room, on the left, or the study, on the right. If you went through the left door, turned left, and went straight, you would pass the living room, an entrance to the dining room, an entrance to the basement, a computer and an Alexa on a desk, an entrance to the garage, the kitchen, and finally the pantry. Most of the lights in our house were turned off except for 2 lamps in the game room, a light in the bathroom, 1 hall light, and a lamp in the living room. I know that was a lot, but it's important for later. What actually happened: my little brother and I were sitting at the table playing some Fortnite on our Xbox. Our dad, who had been previously playing with us, left to take a quick smoke break. We played a match or two when suddenly we heard our Alexa go off. At first we were like, ha, she probably misheard. Then she said words, but they weren't words at all. It's like my brain registered them as words, but they weren't actual words. The last words she said were "help me." I'm a very paranoid guy and have heard about stuff like this before, and my mind just immediately went into a fight or flight response. I locked all the doors that could get to me and my scared little brother. Then we heard the Ring doorbell noise coming from my mother's phone, who was in the study. We waited for a few minutes, and we told our dad about it, so we all cautiously walked to the Alexa and unplugged it. My little brother then went to check out the dining room window, where you can see the front door. He looked out the window and immediately turned back around horrified. 2 seconds later he was perfectly fine, like nothing had just happened. I asked what was wrong, and he said that he had seen a really tall creature with gray skin and no face and that when he blinked, it was gone. The rest of the night I felt like something was watching me. When I finally fell asleep at around 12, I had a dream someone matching the exact same description as my brother had told me walked into the room, immediately turned around, and walked out. And that was the last time anything like that happened to me. Glitched into the future. Meanwhile, at the same location, another person glitched into the past. So this happened back in 2005. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, and every year my town sets aside a Saturday to celebrate itself. It's called Nazareth Day if anyone is interested. Mostly it's a craft show with some local musicians playing and an excuse for the small businesses in town to attract some customers. The kind of neat part is that at night the fire department sets off fireworks at the local park. It's a nice display that lasts a pretty long time, so it can get super crowded in our little town with people from all over the area coming to see the fireworks. My friend, who would later become my girlfriend for almost 3 years, but that's a different story, and I decided to walk down to the park that night to catch the show. It was only about a 10-minute walk from my house, and I knew the way like the back of my hand. I had been living in the area pretty much my whole life, and my grandmother's house was right by the park as well. I had no problem getting there, and my friend and I enjoyed a wonderful evening together. By this point it was around 9 p.m., and we decided to head back home and spend the rest of the night chilling at my house. The trip should have taken us only another 10 minutes tops, but somehow we managed to get lost. Again, I've walked this path so many times before that it should have just been second nature. I had walked back the way we came. I remember walking past my grandmother's house, and then that's when things got strange. We hit what should have been a main road that's normally relatively busy, but somehow we instead ended up in a new neighborhood. I was confused, but I didn't want to alarm my friend. She had just moved to the area from out of state during the school year and was unfamiliar with the town, so for all she knew, I was going the right way. I kept trying to assure myself that I had just made a wrong turn somewhere and I trudged on, trying to find an area that looked familiar. The strangest part to me was how quiet and dead the neighborhood was. As I said, we get a lot of visitors to see the fireworks, and they had just ended, so we should have been passing lines of cars leaving and seeing the people who lived close by walking home like us. Instead, it seemed as though everyone was in their houses already, and there was no noise to hint that a large gathering had just taken place only a couple minutes away. I thought about knocking on someone's door to ask for directions, but the idea made me feel uneasy, and I was sure that I could find my way out if I just kept wandering. After a few minutes, my friend finally sensed my confusion and began to panic. She suffers from some anxiety disorders, so, understandably, being lost in an unfamiliar area kind of triggered her. We sat down on a nearby curb, and I waited for her to calm down a little before I explained that I think I made a wrong turn but that I could find our way back to the main road. She was skeptical, but what choice did we have but to continue on? I honestly don't know how long we wandered around. Neither of us had cell phones yet, so we couldn't check the time or call someone to pick us up or look up directions. I still kept considering knocking on someone's door, but I was both scared to do so and stubborn. This was my hometown, and god damn it, I was going to find my way back. At some point we had passed into a more rural spot just outside of whatever town we were in. We could see some bright lights through some tall bushes and we pushed our way through them to get a look. That was the other strange thing. The neighborhood was oddly dim, so the light was a welcome relief. I had thought that maybe we had found the main road again, but what we saw instead left us frozen in our tracks. Somehow, we were on a cliff, and below us was this brilliantly shining city. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The buildings were strange shapes, and they were towering to the sky. There was nothing like this around my town. Most ways you went out of the town would take you to nothing but open cornfields. I remember looking over to my friend, who had this wide-eyed look that seemed to demand some explanation that I couldn't give. As awe-inspiring as this newly discovered city was, it also gave me an extremely unsettling feeling, and standing there gawking at it wasn't going to help us. When I say we were on a cliff, imagine standing near the Hollywood sign and looking down at Los Angeles. So we headed back through the bushes, and just like that, we were on the main road where we should have been to start with. There were cars going by again, and the neon glow of the local 7-Eleven had never looked so inviting. We headed in to take a breather after what happened and to grab ourselves a drink. The clock in the station read just after 1 a.m. It didn't feel like we had been lost for 4 hours, but perhaps we had been, or maybe time moved differently wherever we had ended up. I spent years trying to convince myself that I had just taken a wrong turn and that perhaps I had been overlooking some nearby town that just looked so majestic given the circumstances of being lost. I retraced my steps to find the neighborhood and cliff. I was never able to find them again, and my friend and I never talked about the experience until about 2 years ago. The fact that she remembered it just as vividly as I do makes me believe that something strange really did go down that night. A few months ago, I discovered this community and was indecisive about whether to share this story. It was only when I stumbled upon a story online while scrolling through that I decided it needed to be shared. A walking shadow. I was born in a small town in South Mississippi, but my parents moved to a more central area in the state when I was a year old. When I was about 5, we moved to the house that I lived in up until a couple of years ago. I'm 21. I feel like I can sense when something isn't right, sort of like a sixth sense, I guess, and in the house there often felt like there was a presence in there, especially when I was alone. I'd had numerous friends and family stay the night over the years and report to me that they felt something following/watching them in the house. A little off topic, as this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what I'm going to say, it just demonstrates that the area in and around my house may have been involved in something. The house was situated at the corner of a neighborhood, bordered by a forest on both the back and side, with a creek flowing approximately 200 yards behind it. My childhood best friend and I grew up in the woods and felt at home there, though we always felt like we weren't necessarily alone sometimes, and it would freak us out, but we actually enjoyed the adrenaline rush of feeling like we were in danger. I do not have that same kind of feeling anymore. Fast forward to when I'm probably 12, and the woman who owned the land behind the house had it all chopped so she could sell the timber maybe a year or less prior. By this point in time, some of the undergrowth and saplings have begun to grow back, and much of it is probably waist high. It's probably between lunch and 5, and we're in what's left of the woods trying our hearts out to build our own forts. I'm up closer to the house, and he's down maybe 20 yards from the creek near a much smaller stream where my dad often dumped deer and fish bones/guts for the coyotes to eat. Despite the distance, we could see each other closely due to the low height of the growth. I finish my simple, and poorly made, fort and relax for a moment. For some reason I decide to suddenly stand up and look down to where my friend is to see how he's coming along. When I look down there, I see a dark figure, maybe 6 feet tall, standing behind him with its hand raised above my friend's head like it's about to strike him. Naturally, I call out a warning to my friend, and as he turns to regard me, the figure just vanishes. One moment it's there, and one moment it just isn't. I tell him what I saw, and he believes me and thanks me for possibly saving him. A year or so later, I was retelling what happened to my brother and some of his friends to kind of scare them, even though they're all like 5 years older than me, lol, when my brother goes pale. Later he tells me that he saw the same thing or something similar. He told me that one of the times we were playing hide and seek in the woods, something we and many of the neighborhood kids did often, I was the last one he hadn't found. He said he was down near the creek when he saw some brush on the wood line rustling. He thinks he's found me, so he calls out to me and says he knows where I'm at. He runs over and pulls the brush back when a dark figure runs by him from the spot he was looking at. He said he was so scared that he sprinted back to the house only to find me in the kitchen eating something. The figure was seen or thought to be seen many different times over the years by many of us and our friends, so we just referred to it as the figure and stopped going into the woods at night or near dusk because we were afraid. I guess it is definitely worth noting that there was a pretty large graveyard, maybe 50 yards in front of the house. Does anyone have any guess as to what the figure was? Had many other people not seen the same thing independently, today I would think my mind had played a trick on me. I'm curious what everyone else thinks. There's a portal to another dimension under my bed. Listening to the stories about the disappearing dogs and teleporting cat reminded me of this story that happened fairly recently, and I decided to share it to see what the people in here could make of it. For background, I'm 15 years old, and I live with my parents, 2 living cats, a rat, and a betta fish. My room is very small, only about 15 times 5 feet across. My bed is shoved into a small alcove under a window that looks out into the yard, with the nightstand against the wall on the left side where the alcove stops about halfway down the length of my bed. There's a doorway that goes into the bathroom, and on the other side of that is my desk. Everything started on a day when my respite worker was coming to see me while my parents went out. I have autism, diabetes, and clinical depression. We were looking for the cats, Biscuit and Sugar, to make sure they were inside and safe before it got dark. Sugar was inside on the couch. He's a little more shy and not as bold as Biscuit, so he's usually easier to catch. But we couldn't find Biscuit. Our yard is pretty large and open compared to our house, so he would be easy to find if he was out there. We have 2 large bells hanging on our gate that leads outside the yard, so if anything touched it, we would be alerted. My dad started shaking the bushes and the tree to see if he was there. Nope. Mom goes inside and checks the kitchen cabinets, he's not there. She opens up some food for him, which under any other circumstance would have worked like a charm, but this time only Sugar comes. I start checking the closets, he's not there. The bathroom cabinets? Nope. The shower, where he likes to hide sometimes, nada. Under my parents' bed, still nothing. Zippo. Zilch. No Biscuit anywhere. Then I decide to check in my room under my bed. I get a flashlight and lie down on the floor trying to see under it. And just like usual, there is absolutely nothing of any importance under there. My bed is not easy to get underneath, the space under it is only about wide enough for a person's arm to fit. He should not have been able to get under there anyway. I give up and go to see if my dad found him. Dad found nothing. I go back inside to check on my mom. My mom is in my room freaking out. I talk to her, hug her, tell her everything will be okay, we'll find him, etc. Then, right in front of our faces, Biscuit squeezes out from under my bed, where he clearly wasn't less than 5 minutes earlier. Mom goes outside to tell Dad that we found him, but the first thing I do is drop back down in front of the bed and shine the flashlight under it. There's still nothing under there that he could have used to hide, I would have seen him. We were calling him, he knows his name, and if he didn't come to that, he obviously would have come for food, he always does, and we looked basically everywhere else he could have been hiding. My dad and uncle joke that there's a portal to the Twilight Zone under my bed or some shit and that's where he went. Either way, I thought you guys would enjoy this story, maybe we can figure out an explanation. When I drove home from work at 10 p.m., I found myself driving on a 2-lane, 45 miles per hour, mostly straight country road with small rolling hills under intense storms. The area has had a lot of population growth lately, so there are a ton more cars on the road at all hours now, so I'm used to getting stuck behind slow drivers. This road also has deep drainage ditches on the sides because it's in a floodplain, and the road surface isn't in great condition either, so there are lots of deep puddles of standing water because the ditches were already overflowing by the time I left work. I have ADHD and have a tendency of tailgating on autopilot, so I try very hard not to creep up on people, and the rain was so bad it was like I was driving through a hurricane, so I left a good amount of space between our cars. The guy behind me was not happy that we were going under the speed limit and went to pass both me and the car in front of me, with a tractor trailer coming over the hill in the opposite lane. The guy behind me guns it and tries to burn past us both, and I had just enough time to say, "Oh, you dump CK," and my lizard brain must have realized my life was in danger and went on hyper alert or something because time slowed down so much it was like I was watching a movie in slow motion. I see the dude try to speed around me, he loses traction and hydroplanes a little. I'm braking hard, seeing what's about to happen and sliding a bit as well, but heavy trucks hauling a trailer can't stop on a dime, certainly not in a heavy downpour. The truck driver is leaning on the horn, and the guy rips his car back into my lane between me and the car in front of me, and I swear to God, he went through the front end of my car. I drive an Elantra, so it's a fairly compact car, but I saw the tail end of his car intersect and pass through my car like when graphics clip with each other in video games. It looked like he just drove through me like I was a ghost, or he was a ghost, but the truck saw him too. I have never wished I had an onboard dash camera more than that night because I just want to verify if I'm crazy. My proximity sensors were going crazy on my dashboard, so if he just missed me, it must have been by a micrometer, though my brain can't fathom how it happened. It makes me wonder if my parallel self in another dimension is now in a body bag in the morgue. I am still baffled as to why I am not currently in traction at the hospital, considering that some impatient jackass felt the need to win the Indy 500 on a flooded back road during a goddamned monsoon. It seems that a man disappeared in front of me and my friends. About 10 years ago, I used to often hang out with many friends in a park near our houses. It's basically the garden of a home for the elderly. It's very, very big and open to the public to visit for a certain time of day. This enormous garden is divided into two parts, a first, which is located at an upper point, where there is the access gate, and a second, in a sort of valley. Anyway, there is only a single path that runs all through the garden and finally returns to the starting point, the upper point, where there is the gate. In the valley is also present a little nun cemetery. The home for the elderly was a convent until last century, but I don't think this is somehow related to what we experienced, so I guess this is a superfluous particular. Anyway, this day we were in the park like always, but this time we decided to stay until the closing time. We didn't remember if the park closed at 17:30 p.m. or 18:00 p.m., and since the time was about 17:15 p.m., we kept searching for someone to ask. We noticed a man that was walking from the opposite direction in our direction, and as he got closer, we noticed that he was dressed as a guardian or something, also with his hat on his head. I remember that he had these showy and out-of-fashion red mustaches. Who, if not him, could know the closing time? So we decided to approach and ask him. Okay, so he was practically on us, and continuing at our pace, we should have crossed paths in the middle of a curve, hidden by a bush and so not visible from our location. So we kept going, but when we arrived we didn't find the man, he had disappeared. We were like, what the duck? Where did he go? And tried to think of the fact that he may have gone through another path, but, as I said before, that was the only one. We were all four people who saw him before, and now he has disappeared. Needless to say, scared as duck, we ran away. I can't explain yet how it was possible. Glitch in the Matrix or little people? A couple years ago, I was trying to install some floating shelves in my living room. The wall is hollow and needed anchors. I was using a handheld screwdriver with a detachable magnetic flathead bit to try and gently work the anchor into the wall. The screwdriver was from one of those simple IKEA toolkits that comes with a hammer, pliers, and a bare screwdriver with a bunch of detachable magnetic screwdriver heads that sit in a row for storage. Well, the hole opened up more than I anticipated, and the flathead bit got stuck in the anchor, and both fell into the wall. This was obvious as I pulled back the screwdriver and found it with no head. I remember cussing about it and grabbing a flashlight to see if I could fish them out, but alas, they were gone. I also very clearly saw the row of screwdriver bits with the one flathead missing, and it made my OCD flare. I even remember wondering if or where I could buy a single replacement. The entire toolkit is like $10, so really not a huge loss, but annoyingly hard to replace single bits as a result. Fast forward 2 or 3 weeks. My friend is over helping with a project in the garage. We were installing hooks and shelves on the walls for tools. I was assessing before starting. I had the power drill but also wanted to grab the toolkit from inside just to have extra stuff on hand. I hadn't touched it since the floating wall installation. I pulled the IKEA toolkit from the drawer it lives in and popped it open, since I wanted to check out which bits I might need. Everything was in place. I looked at the row of screwdriver bits, and I was shocked to see that the flathead bit was there. Like nothing had ever happened. I'm just slack-jawed. My friend who was helping me that day is Ojibwe and told me it's the little people. Ojibwe culture recognizes little people who are very similar to the ones from Irish and Scandinavian lore. He suggested I start leaving them gifts like hard candies and tiny shiny objects as a thank you, which I actually did. For me, it definitely felt very glitch in the Matrix. To this day it blows my mind. What do you all think? Train track, man. Hello. I am going to write about my experience I had one day at the train tracks near the house I grew up in. One day in March of my sophomore year in high school, 2014, I had a sleepover with two friends of mine on a Friday night. I and these two friends of mine were always adventurous and getting ourselves into something we had no business really doing at 15-16 years old, but we did it anyways. So, we have the sleepover and do whatever on Friday. We wake up pretty early on Saturday morning, somewhere between 7 and 8 a.m. My parents always slept in on Saturday mornings. My mom being a bus driver and out of the house before I was even up for school, and my dad working 9 to 5 in the back of a car dealership. Me knowing my parents have at least another 3 hours of good solid sleep says, hey, let's go to the train tracks and smoke our cigarettes and hit this bowl pack of weed we have. We easily could have gone on my back deck or somewhere a little closer, but what fun would that have been? We get all of our stuff and head out very early. The train tracks aren't a very long distance from my house, about an 8-minute walk. I lived in a small neighborhood. It is called the village of Artara. No more than 30 houses in the small town that is located to the side of a drag called 993. My mom always said, if you blink, you'll miss it, where we live. We walk the shoulder of 993 for maybe 50 feet, and there is a post office for Artara, and right across from this post office is a bridge to go onto Ledger Road. We go over the bridge, which has been shut down for years, and once you cross the bridge, there is a little cut in the woods that loops you back around to the train tracks. The train tracks where I was are a very long and straight track. You could see at least a mile down. And on each side of the train track is a very steep hillside. At this point in time, March, there was no greenery on shrubs/trees/bushes. You could very visibly see anything on these hillsides. For example, a deer would not be able to hide well. I and my two friends are on the train tracks, and we walk down them maybe half a football field. We stop and huddle up, ready to light it. 5 bowls of marijuana. This is where things actually get spooky. As we huddle to light up our bowl, I, knowing these train tracks, glance one time back to make sure a train is not sneakily coming through the straightaway. At the moments of checking for the safety of me and my friends, that's when I say out loud, do you guys see that too? And I ask this to make sure I'm not seeing things. They both say faintly, yes. What I saw is just downright unexplainable. I will try my best to explain it. It wasn't a man, but it was the same height and body stock as a man. This thing had no face, no ears, no mouth, no hair, no hat on, no eyes, and no nose. This thing didn't have a skin tone. It was white. It was the whitest thing I ever saw, skin-wise. This thing had an outfit very relatable to Michael Myers on it. Like a blue jumpsuit you would see on a janitor or an auto mechanic. It was also relatable to Slender Man. It wasn't tall and abnormal like Slender Man. Just the whole white face, no facial feature thing. This man was standing facing us about 25 yards away. We just walked down here and were walking toward where he would have been. I also stated the state of trees, etc. we would have seen this thing. It appeared out of nowhere. Literally. When my friends both say yes, we see this, I run the other direction back towards the bridge as fast as I can. I look back at them one time just to make sure they are okay. They are both behind me. When I looked back, I saw the thing. It was at the same exact place it was at. The only thing that changed was it wasn't positioned facing us in the bridge. Its body was facing the hillside, and it was looking directly at the hillside. We run through back under the bridge and up the little cut back to on top of the bridge. It took us probably no more than 15 seconds to get back to the bridge. We stood there for at least an hour. We waited. We waited so patiently to see something or someone walk around or just anything. Nothing ever happened. I know this tale is a very long read. I have told this story to my brother, my mom, coworkers, and friends. Everyone believes me, but no one ever has any kind of reasoning or anything for what happened. I remember it so vividly, and it still scares me to this day. I can't explain what happened that day. Does anyone have any input? I am from Pennsylvania, and like I said, I lived in the village of Artara. You can easily look up the Artara post office and see the bridge across from it. There are even some pictures I've found of a train enthusiast that has pictures below and on the bridge. I will reply back or answer any other questions or comments. The neighborhood under Buckingham Mountain. There was something just eerie about my old neighborhood. You could say it was all ghosts, or you could be like me and think maybe parallel universes and time slips have something to do with it. At night in my house you could hear people talking and crying through the air vents, even if no one else was home. I, as well as every visitor and family member, experienced this. A balloon floated up the stairs on its own, remaining near the stair level as if someone were carrying it, a phenomenon witnessed by both my mother and me. The security system regularly went off as if someone had entered the house at night when no one did. Common occurrences included heavy breathing, footsteps on the stairs, and objects moving on their own in the basement. Then, stranger things started happening. Family pets refused to go to certain places. My aunt's dog growled at something with what looked like red eyes in the neighborhood bushes, and we ran for it. This dog is usually calm and never growls or acts aggressively. Other times, we heard children laughing and playing in empty yards or that sort of thing. Then one day, coming home from school, my bus driver got lazy and dropped me about a mile from my house at the edge of the neighborhood rather than at my usual stop. Very uncool. I was in 5th grade. I walked towards home, and as I hit the inner circle of the neighborhood, I noticed something strange. Everything grew quiet. Not normal quiet, like still. Unreal. Then I can't describe it any other way except that there was mass chaos. I heard screaming and pleading for help but saw nobody anywhere on the street. I ran for my life until I got to my front door and pounded for my mother to open up. The screaming got louder and closer, but there was no one there. Finally, after about 10 minutes of sobbing by the door, my mom came out on her own. She looked surprised to see me and asked me where I had been. It had been an hour and a half since the bus was supposed to drop me off, which should have taken me only 10 minutes to walk from the neighborhood entrance, yet she hadn't heard me knocking at all. We moved, and here is where it gets weirdest. The family that moved in after us sent a Christmas card, weirdly addressed to me. I'm a musician, so they asked me how I was doing, blah blah, and then the last sentence, did you ever experience anything bad in this house? We all have terrible feelings here, and terrible things have happened to everyone in the family. We are considering moving. Last year, while teaching a local student, we began discussing unusual topics, and she mentioned that her former English teacher had expressed complaints about her neighborhood. She mentioned that her baby's stroller would roll away on its own and that strange noises kept her family awake all night. I asked her where her teacher had lived. Yep, you guessed it. My old neighborhood. This is a story that my cousin told me. I just made the connection that they could have narrowly avoided being a missing 411 statistic. This story was told to me by my cousin. We were swapping spooky stories at my uncle's cabin when he told me this one. He and 2 friends decided to take off for the weekend and go camping. They grabbed their gear, food, and camper van and drove out to the mountain range. They checked the forecast beforehand, and it said sunny with no precipitation for the duration of the weekend. It's mid-July. As they're setting up camp, Dave says he's going to eat some magic mushrooms and go for a vision quest. The other 2 laugh it off and tell him to be careful and not to wander off too far. A few hours pass, and Dave has yet to return. As it's starting to get dark, he emerges from the bushes with a puzzled look on his face. He explained that his trip was going just fine until he turned around and realized he'd lost track of the path. He stumbled around the forest for what seemed an eternity, in a thought loop. It wasn't until he stumbled and fell that he realized he was going in the opposite direction of the camp. He turned around and doubled back. As evening sets in and the crew is getting ready to call it a night, it starts to snow. Then it starts to really snow, even blizzard. They pack everything in the van and decide to leave the next day. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, Jake, my cousin, wakes up covered in goosebumps. He climbs out of his bed and wanders around the van, first checking to make sure it's still locked. It is. He turns around and tries to look out the window. It's completely frosted over. As he's trying to make out anything at all, a feeling comes over him like there's someone, or something, looking directly back at him from outside. He dismisses it and goes back to bed. The next morning they awaken to snow still coming down. Jake, still thinking about last night, walks around to the window he felt uneasy at. To his horror there are bipedal tracks leading up to the van window, but none leading away. He runs and tells his friends. They agree to get out of there ASAP. They get to the nearest gas station, still very remote, and their van breaks down. As they're trying to figure out what to do, this fella drives up to the pumps and says, "We haven't seen weather like this for 20 years. You boys be careful out there, something's not right." Then he drives away. Out of nowhere this large, dark red van pulls up directly in front of them, and the driver gruffly says, "Hurry up, get in, I'll take you to the nearest town." With a little hesitation, they get inside. As they drive, He starts going faster and faster until they reach speeds not recommended for winter. Sure they're going to die, ghost white, speechless, they ride. He gets them to the nearest town, opens the door, and says, "Hurry up, get out." They oblige, and before they can even thank him, he pulls a U-turn and drives back the same direction they came. They later found out that the first man they talked to at the gas station drove for a couple of kilometers only to meet his demise via head-on collision. It's a crazy world we live in. It's an interesting story, it comes from a very honest person too. He wouldn't have exaggerated the details. Let me know what you think. Do you believe there was something pulling their strings? I'm also intrigued by the guy who drove them out of there, very mysterious. This would have been somewhere near Jasper National Park, Canada. So one night I'm home alone, I go to bed, and I fall asleep. Later, during the night, I wake up, thirsty. So I go downstairs to get a drink since our house is old and I don't like lead poisoning. The city has since replaced our water pipes, but this was a while ago. Now because our house is older, most of the rooms on the first floor are also pass-through rooms. The kitchen has two entrances, one that connects to the dining room, which then connects to the living room, front door, upstairs, etc. The other end connects to the back hall and then the back door, garage, and basement. They're on opposite sides, and each has a light switch to the kitchen light. I go into the kitchen and turn on the light switch by the dining room door. I get my drink, put the cup in the sink, and go to leave the room. I turn off the light as I leave, and immediately after, the light turns on again. I assume I just fumbled the switch and go to turn it off again. Except it is off. I turn around and see the switch on the other side of the room was on. And these are not easy to flip switches. They're old and heavy plastic switches that require a fair bit of force to flip. Something actively flipped the switch. I noped out of there stupid fast. Closed the kitchen door, threw dining room chairs in a pile against it, triple checked all windows and doors were locked, then sped upstairs with my cat and hid on my bed. My cat fell asleep because she's old, I did not. A few hours later, my cat wakes up. And at the same time, I hear creaking that means someone or something is going up or down the basement stairs. Specifically, a person. The stairs creak differently based on the weight applied. My cat hisses in that direction, something she rarely does. She only hisses when she actively hates or is deathly terrified of whatever it is, and I've only heard her hiss at maybe 7 things over her lifetime. She's 17 now. The stairs stop making noise after the thing makes it to the top or bottom. It was too far to make out if it was going up or down. My cat stared at where the stairs were for a few more hours but eventually went to sleep. I still did not. To this day, I don't know what the hell that was. Possible wormhole. I used to live in a town on the mid-north coast of NSW, Australia. It's littered with small towns up and down the Pacific Highway. Some are as close as 10 to 25 to 45 minutes. The town I lived in, A, has roughly about 26,000 residents, with a neighboring town, B, at about 13,000. The time it took for me to drive from one to the other is about 25 minutes. These distances come into play somewhat later. I also lived in a town, C, 10 minutes from the bigger one, so to get from town C to town B would be roughly 30 minutes. I have to go through town A to get to town B. So my ex-girlfriend and I decided to go to town B, her hometown, for the evening to spend time with her friends, who live on the other side of town, so another 10 to 15 minutes added to the drive, so all up the drive is about 45 minutes from the friend's house to ours. I drove, as I didn't drink at the time, so she can have her wines when she spends time with her girlfriends. The end of the night comes, and about 11 o'clock we decide to leave. I don't speed when I drive. If I do, it's normally only a few kilometers over the limit. A 45-minute drive home, so we would get there at about 11:45, 11:50. So at 11 we leave, get in the car, and get to the highway. I glanced at the clock on the dash, it said something like 11:05. This is odd. Got to town A at approximately 11:15, even more odd, and got home at about 11:20. Is there something wrong with my clock in the car? Got home and looked at the clocks, 11:25, we lost a whole 20 minutes of drive time. There are no shortcuts to and from. The only other way is through the bush that is mostly inaccessible if you don't have a 4WD, and the time would take even longer. There was nothing wrong with the clocks at the house or in the car. We lost time somehow. Missing 411, the stray sod phenomena. From Diarmaid McManus. 1. The first case was from McManus Minister. He had a visitation to make and set off walking to the place. Crossing a vast field significantly shortened the walk. Though big, it was open, and you could see the two large trees near the middle and the rough path leading to the distant exit stile far away. The priest opened the entry gate and started crossing the field as he had done dozens of times before. But when he reached the far side, there was no stile, no path, and no cleared area that would allow him to even climb out. Completely puzzled, he did the obvious, searching all along the hedged area for the missing stile and open patch. Nothing. As he went on, he ultimately circumnavigated the entire area. No stile but also no original entry gate either. No matter where he arrived, there was the same impenetrable wall of thick plants staring back at him. He had, as the Irish say, stepped upon the stray sod and was trapped within its trickery. An hour or more later, he came to the spot where the exit stile should have been, and there it was. What should we take from this? Although the field was familiar and the entry was normal, certain pieces of the area, the initial entry gate, the joining patch, and the exit stile, were gone. One's best hypothesis would be that this scene was imitative of the real field in the normal world, but not the real field. It could be walked into, but not walked out of until something changed to allow that. The priest also reported that upon initially arriving at the exit stile's location and discovering its alteration, he heard a distant chuckle, seemingly mocking him. 2. McManus' second case was that of a young woman who was a housekeeper at a great house but was going to take the long walk back to her family in a nearby village. To get to that village, she had to cross over the hill called Lisard Fort, known as a fairy fort by the locals. She did that and stood at the summit a while, enjoying the view outward towards her own village in the distance. Down the hill she danced until she came to a ditch at the bottom. She headed for a gap in the ditch, but when she arrived, she blanked for a second and was walking in the precise opposite way. She composed herself and turned and walked to the gap. The same thing happened again. It kept happening. Frightened now, she searched along the ditch, always coming up against some barrier that refused to let her pass. This scenario happened for hours. She began feeling a sense of hostility radiating toward her from the fairy fort. Feeling hopeless, hours went by. The villagers became concerned and organized search parties. She saw the lanterns coming. She was standing, shouting and waving, but they showed no sign of seeing her, even though they passed within 20 yards. Finally, hours more gone by, she realized that the barrier was gone and scrambled quickly out and went to her village and family. This case is almost identical to the first, with one added piece of information. She could walk in and ultimately walk out. Light, gravity, and other forces seemed to be normal. Time passed normally. The area was as she knew it. The addition to reality was the barrier, and the addition to our understanding was that she could see out of the stray sod, though others could not see in. 3. McManus' third case was one in which a man left a party at one house on an estate to go across a large field to another house for the evening. It was past midnight, and the walk began as usual, but very quickly the entirety of the environment changed. He was immediately aware that he was no longer in the familiar field. As a good Irishman, he suspected fairy involvement, so he employed the old legend idea of turning his coat inside out. It didn't work. Nothing changed, and he couldn't find any sign of a way out. He walked around and worried himself into a nervous sweat. Finally, hours later, a glimpse of a way out occurred, and he hurried on. The opening was in the direction of the first house, so he took the opportunity and straggled back there, showing up at the door in a state. Again, walk in, walk around, the environment changed but not changing the way things like light and gravity work. Could not see out until the very last moment. Time operated normally. This one seemed clearly like a separate stray sod bubble out of touch with the normal world. None of McManus' 3 cases were of very large places alongside, even though the priest's field was a very large multi-acre area. Other examples of stray sod phenomena. We have Ron Quinn's 3 cases for starters. In 2 of those cases the witnesses were presented with mists, small islands, and bridges to get there. In both of those cases they walked across the bridges out of curiosity and voluntarily. The island acreages were similar to the fields in the Irish cases, but within both islands, the witnesses saw fairy folk, with whom they did not interact. The witnesses could also see our normal world from the Faerie Island shore. Light, gravity, and the forces seemed normal. Time passage was also normal. The third case was an entry, again entered voluntarily in the sense of accidental, but this experience included a significant change of visual atmosphere once crossing over. The crossing was into a similar physical environment, mountainous, but distinct from the normal. The main addition to our understanding here was that this environment was alongside a very great terrain, no small field nor island. In the fairy census there is a good narrative about a hiker pushing aside some forest bushes and noticing a different type of forested area beyond, which was explored for some time and found very large, just as a mountain area should be. Again, no time rate issues. The trickster phenomenon suggests that the transfer of objects from our normal space to another may be quite common. The few Faerie world witness cases seem to show that these thousands of small object translocations do not have to disappear into tiny cubbyholes of almost dislocated spacetime but might have a whole other world into which they migrate. But this is, without needing to say it, pretty speculative without more cases of witnesses going in there, walking about, and coming back to tell us about it. There are a fair number of encounters wherein the experience is of a house or even a village out of place, which, later, cannot be refound. I have a list of maybe 2 or 3 dozen of these. I'm tired though, and I don't feel like making another lengthy study of a separately defined anomaly, and so, as I know that you know these things already, I'll just leave it as a claim. There are lots of reports of things like cottages et al. Even visited inside, that later cannot be documented as existing. Mid-1950s, Neversink Reservoir, Washington. A hiker was walking the shore of the reservoir when he saw a bridge, which he hadn't noticed before. It seemed to extend out to a large fog bank from the shore. More than mystified, the witness saw that the bridge was made of something like brass, with handrails and designs upon it that looked like some strange form of writing. He walked across into and out of the fog bank to discover a small island there, which absolutely should not have been. The mist completely surrounded this island. Unfamiliar plants and animals populated the place. 30 yards further along the shore were 3 small men. They were 3 feet tall, bearded, with long hair flowing down their backs and white robes. The central figure carried an object, but the witness wasn't close enough to see what it was. The group then walked away in the trees. Our witness, deciding that he'd risked enough, found the bridge again and moved swiftly across. Once on the shore again, the bridge and the mist slowly faded away. The little island, however, remained, as did a new mountain, which had somehow manifested between 2 prominent peaks. Then that mountain and the island disappeared, leaving the witness with the world that he understood. The disappearing wolf. This happened a few months ago, but it still freaks me out. I figured I'd share it here, even if it's not considered an actual glitch, because it was a very strange experience regardless. My hometown is one of those typical American small towns where everybody knows everybody. The crime rate is practically non-existent because most of the people who live there are old people or families. I'm in college, but I was staying at home one night since classes hadn't started yet. It was late August, so the weather was still very warm. Around 9 p.m. I decided to go for a walk since it wasn't raining and it helps me clear my head. Like I said, my town has a low crime rate, so it's pretty safe for me to walk around alone at night. There's a small park in the middle of my town that I have to walk past to get to my house. There's not much to it aside from a lighted area in the middle consisting of bushes and benches. 2 main streets and 2 side streets border the park, lining the sidewalk with trees and benches. So I'm walking down one of the main streets about 3 blocks away from the park. This is when things got weird. Approximately 2 blocks away, on a side street, I see a really big, dark, shadowy figure illuminated in the dim glow of the street lights. The figure moved somewhat quickly, and I only saw the top of it, so I couldn't get a good look at what it was. I figured that maybe it was someone on a bicycle, since it's not too weird to occasionally see someone biking at night in this part of town. The figure moved at the speed a bike usually would, too. There were also cars parked in the way, which further obscured my view. I kept walking forward. I reached the block where I had seen the figure move, which is located diagonally across from the park. I glanced over towards the park, and there, running around in the open field, was what looked like a large dog. It looked bigger than a typical Siberian husky in size, and it wasn't on a leash, nor was there anybody else around. It was dark to the point where I could make out the figure of the animal, but I still couldn't see what it actually looked like. It ran around in circles a couple of times before disappearing into the darkness behind a bench that faces the road I was walking on. I stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't want to move any closer to the park since I didn't know what the animal was, and I was afraid that whatever it was could hurt me. I stood there for a while, looking at the park and ducking behind parked cars to avoid being seen by the animal. I kept looking for shadows or hints of movement, but after about 10 minutes, I cautiously started walking again. As I was walking past the park, I glanced over at the bench where I last saw the animal before it disappeared, and there was nothing there. I couldn't see anything moving in the distance or on the nearby streets. I didn't even see anything move in the lighted area in the middle of the park. Once I got past the park, I booked it home, which is pretty much just half of a block away anyway. I frantically told my parents what I saw, and they just thought I saw a dog, but I insisted that this animal was bigger and unleashed. More like a wolf. They thought I was crazy or just seeing things, and that was that, but I know for a fact that I saw this thing. I have never seen the wolf again since then. The outskirts of my town are pretty rural, but the town itself is almost all residential, so there are no woods nearby this park. I'm not even sure if the area of the country that I live in even has wolves. I think we have coyotes, but I can't imagine that they would migrate from the woods on the outskirts of town into the actual town itself. It just seems like it would be a rather far trek for them. Plus, nobody else in the neighborhood has complained about seeing wild coyotes running around. That, coupled with the fact that I only saw the animal for a few seconds before it disappeared completely, makes me have a really unsettling feeling. I'm probably the only person in the neighborhood who has seen this animal, and I suppose there could be a logical explanation for it, but I still don't know where it disappeared to that night. I didn't see the animal cross any other roads, which it would have needed to do in order to leave the park, or appear in another area of the park. It just vanished. Anyways, thanks for listening. I and 3 others were temporarily not there to the others. Setting and backstory: I, 42-year-old female, work at a summer camp in upstate New York. I'm a nurse, and the infirmary is right across a little golf cart path from an open-sided shed called the milk station. The milk station is a roof held up by 7-foot-tall 4x4s in each corner. There is no obstruction of view from any side. The health center parks our golf cart on a little gravel spot next to the stairs to the clinic. It's loud, crunchy gravel and is definitely noticeable when someone parks there. This space is directly across a 5-foot wide golf cart path from the milk station. Just so everyone can picture this, the area where this story takes place is about 20 feet of linear space from the milk station to the parking spot. You cannot be looking toward the clinic and the golf cart parking from the milk station and not see it. There are absolutely no obstructions to the view, it's just an open path, no bushes or plantings on either side. One day, near the end of the summer of 2019, I left the clinic with a coworker to go across to the other side of camp. We walked down the steps to the clinic and got into the golf cart to drive to the other side. There were 2 other staff members eating lunch and talking while sitting at the milk station. We waved, made small talk, and left. 10 minutes later we got back to the clinic, parked the cart, and as I exited the cart, my butt hit the bike bell we had mounted on the side rails. I laughed at myself for making such an obnoxious exit from the golf cart. As I walked around the cart, I looked over at the milk station to make a self-deprecating joke about the bell but noted that the other staff members had gone. I went inside the clinic and dropped off my things and then walked back outside about 5 minutes later to walk down to my cabin. As I walked down the steps, I noted that the other 2 staff members had come back to the milk station and were seated where they had previously been when I first left. They looked surprised to see me and asked when I had come back. I mentioned that I had returned a few minutes earlier and then asked them where they had gone. They looked genuinely confused and said they hadn't gone anywhere, they hadn't left the milk station the entire time, and they hadn't seen us come back to the clinic. I was bewildered. I told them about hitting the bell with my butt and checking the station for them when we returned and that they were definitely not there. They were equally bewildered because they had not seen, nor heard, us drive back up or get out, and pass within 10 feet of them to go back into the clinic. I wanted to verify all this with my friend, so I called her out of the clinic, and without any explanation, we asked her if she had seen them when we had returned to the clinic. She said no, they hadn't been there, that she had looked over to make a joke about them taking an extra long break, but that they weren't there. None of the 4 of us were ever able to explain why we hadn't been able to see or hear the other pair on our return to the clinic. I work at this camp every summer, and nothing like this has happened since then. This is as close to a glitch in the Matrix as I have ever come in my life. I used to play in the woods all the time when I was a kid. I have felt the things so many people here are talking about. This isn't obviously about me or anyone going missing, it's more so just the strange and odd feeling of being in the woods. I would go in there just to mess around, build forts, and explore the woods. When it would rain heavily, I'd go in there with my cousin or a neighbor and run on fallen branches or logs like bridges. I remember one day we were doing it later in the evening during the winter, so it would be getting dark soon. We were just messing around when I just got hit with this really weird feeling. Like if I spent any more minutes in here, I'd die. I took my cousin and told him we're leaving. Before I even began exploring the woods, it's not as large as a lot of woods or national parks that are mentioned. There was a section where it was easily accessible from 2 sides, one where a neighborhood was and another from across the street from my house. The only other entrances were on the opposite side of the woods. There was almost like a divide 10 yards into the woods where a lot of thorn bushes and heavy amounts of trees blocked you from going any further easily. The first couple times I went into the woods, I never crossed the divide. I was always very suspicious and creeped out by the other side. It wasn't until some kids started beating the bushes down to make it easier. There was also another section of woods that we just called the trails, not directly connected to these woods but once a part of it. A street separated the trails from the woods near me. This was all marked and explored, unlike the other woods, and was lined with gravel paths. One early morning, my cousin and I felt like exploring it and taking more risky paths. We were basically completely alone out there. This area of woods stretched on for miles. While exploring, we found one thing that bothered us a lot: a smushed tent and an entire bottle of liquor. The bottle was still closed. My cousin wanted to open the tent, but I got hit with the same feeling of absolute dread and told him we should keep going. My personal, almost, missing 411 case. I want to tell you about something that happened to me more than 20 years ago, in 1996. This story sounds like a potential missing 411 case. It took place in Crimea, Ukraine/Russia. I went there with my friends. There were 4 of us, and we were all students in our early 20s. Our plan was simple: to spend 2 weeks swimming and sunbathing. Also, we wanted to make 1 to 2 short hikes in the mountains. Our hike destination was informally called the Valley of Ghosts. You can Google it as Valley of Ghosts Crimea. The valley is famous locally for its unique landscape with rocks weathered by erosion and shaped like statues of people or animals. Also, locals think that it is an anomalous zone, where lots of UFO sightings took place, but I don't know if any missing cases were documented. We planned for a 2-day hike. We started early and at a slow pace. The mountain is not high, and you do not need any special equipment to ascend. There are established hiking trails, and usually many tourists are going through the route. Our plan was to reach the plateau on the first day, spend a night there, and then in the morning start hiking all the way through towards the waterfalls and descend there, making this an easy through hike. The way up was easy, the scenery was beautiful, the stone statues were impressive, and the overall atmosphere was very peaceful. We set up our camp, had dinner, and went to sleep. We did not bring any tents with us, only sleeping bags, and therefore we spent the night beneath the stars. The night was clear, but closer to sunrise I woke up because the weather started to change and it began raining slightly. I remember vividly that it was that moment when I realized that I did not want to continue the hike. Maybe I just wanted to descend as soon as possible, or maybe I was tired or anticipating that the weather would get even worse. Anyhow, after breakfast I told my friends that I would not go any further with them and would go back to our rented apartment. Of course, I had to come up with something more convincing than "I just don't want to go." I do not remember what the reason was that I told my friends, but we split our ways lightheartedly. They went on their trail through the plateau, and I started the descent. As soon as I began walking down, the weather became much worse. Dense fog descended rapidly, and I was truly shocked how it had covered everything around me instantly. I couldn't see more than 10 meters, 30 feet, in front of me. Since I was walking on the trail, I was pretty confident that if I followed it, everything would be okay. But as soon as the fog covered everything around me, weird things began to happen. First, I started hearing the voices. It was like a distant whispering, mumbling, and I couldn't decipher any coherent words. Those voices seemed to be different in tone, as if there were people of different ages and sexes. Some sounds were almost non-human. These sounds were unfamiliar and eerie. I felt as if someone was watching me. At this point I became a bit frightened and concerned, but soon enough I saw that there was someone walking towards me. I was thrilled and relieved. It looked like a silhouette of a man with a dog on the same trail that I was walking. Since at that moment I started to suspect that I might have taken a wrong path, I wanted to ask directions and how long it would take to go down. And just as I increased my pace towards my savior, the man in front of me started to vanish. At first I thought there was some rock or tree/bush at that place that I mistakenly took for a human with a dog, but when I reached the spot where I saw them, I realized that there was absolutely nothing that I could have mistaken for a figure. No rock formations, no trees or bushes. Nothing, just fog. Needless to say, I was freaking out. Bracing myself, I continued along the trail and after some time noticed that the whispering was gone. I did not hear it any longer. After 10 minutes or so, the trail began to go down the hill, and soon, hallelujah, I was out of the fog. Damn, was I happy not to be surrounded by that freaky fog anymore. And that uncomfortable feeling of being watched disappeared right after I came out of the fog. I looked down the trail as it was going through the hills, and I felt so relieved. I was already anticipating a soon and very welcome exit. So I started my happy descent. As I was walking down, I spotted the small hill with dried up grass in front of me. It looked like I was going on the right path along the trail. But when I reached this spot, this hill covered with dried up grass, the odd and unsettling feeling of being tricked dawned on me. I clearly realized that this trail on that hill was fake. I couldn't have made the wrong turn, and I couldn't have missed anything. There was only one straight road with no turns. I just knew that this hill was not the real one, as if someone or something had switched off the path while I was walking. I was truly certain that something was wrong. I double-checked the route. The road looked quite normal, nothing out of the ordinary, a clear ground pathway with very few rocks, maybe 2 to 3 feet wide, so I continued to go along. But as I was walking further and further, I noticed that the path under my feet was becoming less visible with each step. I stopped and decided to turn back, thinking that maybe that was the wrong path. However, I couldn't find any traces of the path that I was taking minutes ago. I was frantically searching for the path for maybe half an hour and found absolutely no traces of it, none. I was in the mountains, and it was just rocks and some scarce shrubs and plucks of dry grass, that's it. As if I were teleported there and didn't walk on a clear path minutes ago. I was terrified, but I tried my best not to give in to panic. I was determined to get down. I felt that I needed to go down as quickly as possible, otherwise I would perish. I knew that the only way down was to climb the rocks and started to scramble down. I can honestly say that it was really hard. There was no trail, and I had no equipment. I literally had to crawl down, clutching to anything I could hold on to, bumps of mud, rocks, and batches of grass. A couple of times I had to turn back because of the cliffs, which gave me zero chance of passing through without falling. Frustrated and tired, after what seemed like endless hours of descent, I started screaming for help, although I knew that there would be no one in the mountains in this kind of weather. However, I managed to brace myself, and after probably one more hour of descent, I saw the ground below, and then, finally, I found myself at the foothill of the mountain. Now I was all over for real, now I was safe at last. During all my descent I had this feeling that I had to go down as fast as I could, that if I stayed there a bit longer, I would never go back. Although I wasn't lost or afraid, those feelings were present, but in the background, I felt as if I literally had a limited amount of time to escape from this mountain, or I would be in serious trouble. I returned to our rented apartment, and 10 to 15 minutes later, my friends came back too. It turned out they were also spooked by the weather and decided to go back to the apartment. They turned back 15 to 20 minutes after I left them. And yet they didn't see any fog or hear any whispering on the way down, and they returned via the same trail that we hiked the day before, and it was very clear. So their descent was very quick. What puzzles me is that I really felt like I had spent a lot of time wandering in the mountains, at least 3 to 4 hours, and yet I returned just 15 minutes before my friends. I was young, 6 or 7. Every time my best friend slept over, it would happen. I've tried to explain it away as a reoccurring nightmare, but there's just no way. To this day my dreams don't make any sense. People, places, and things all look different in my dreams. It's obviously not reality. But this dream was perfect. I would be in my room, every detail exactly the same. The teddy bear wallpaper, my knickknacks on the shelves, and the spot on the wall where I wrote my name in crayon and blamed it on the dog. Everything, every detail, is perfectly as it should be. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, in the dark, in my room. I'd look around and notice the shadows on the wall looked like shadows of forest animals, deer, squirrels, and rabbits. I'd try to figure out what objects in my room were making these perfect shadows. As soon as I'd come to the realization, shit, I'm getting goosebumps right now typing it out, that there was nothing in the room that could possibly cast these shadows onto the wall, they would slowly blink open their glowing red eyes. Then they'd peel off the wall, like you'd peel a sticker label off of a box. They'd hop off of the wall and run over to me to kick and bite me. I could never remember how it ended. I'd just wake up the next morning. I don't know why, but I never told my parents about it. It happened so many times, but I never told anyone. I was young, so I didn't have the idea to check for bruises the next day, but I was a clumsy kid, so I was covered in them anyway. I don't experience sleep paralysis, however, I do occasionally wake up in the hypnopompic state and see giant shadowy spiders crawling across my pillow, which is terrifying. A few years ago my then 2-year-old son woke up screaming from his nap. This was normal for him. My oldest would sing herself awake, and he would just scream. Kids, am I right? He had a very limited vocabulary at this point, but he managed to describe sleep paralysis, complete with Hatman, to me. There's no way he could have known about Hatman at that age. But he told me about him. That was the proof I needed. Shadow entities are real. I've heard that they haunt generations of families. Well, as I was explaining his experience and then my childhood experience to my mom, she admitted to me that she sees shadow people occasionally. That's it, I'm a believer for life. Time glitch. I experienced a time glitch about 5 years ago, and I am still trying to figure out if there is a rational explanation. At the time I was working in an office in Cork City Centre, and the car park I used was over a kilometer away. There were a few different routes from the office to the car park, but it was all uphill on the way back to the car. If I took the shortest route and really rushed, practically ran, on a nice day, it would take at least 9 minutes. If I walked at my usual pace, it would take up to 14 minutes, as there are several roads that need to be crossed. The day in question I left the office along with 3 of my work colleagues. We left at bang on 5 p.m. I checked with the others later, and yes, we left at exactly 5 p.m. The 4 of us walked part of the way together, and then the other 3 branched off as they used another nearer, and more expensive, car park. At the time I used my walk to the car park to practice mindfulness. I tuned into my surroundings, listened to the sounds, looked at the people, experienced being in the moment, etc., etc. I remember climbing the steep stone steps on Kaiser's Quay, beside Elizabeth Fort, and the next thing I was aware of was rounding the corner onto Tower Street. I got into my car totally confused. There was a big gap on my route. I got into my car, and the time was showing as 17.07. Same on my watch. I turned on the car radio. A time check announced 7 minutes past 5. I could not have gotten there that fast, particularly as the first part of the walk included chatting with 3 work colleagues. I racked my memory for the walk to the car, and there is a huge gap. I have no memory at all of walking along several streets. What is particularly strange is that one of my neighbors works in a dentist surgery along the route, and I would have usually waved in the window to her as I passed, so I would always look to see if she was still working, but I have no memory whatsoever of this section of the route. I would also add that Cork City is pretty old, and the area I was walking in is one of the oldest sections. Did I walk into some time loop and get spat out in a different place? I have thought about this over and over, but I cannot explain it. My glitch in the Matrix experience that I still can't get over, and I don't think I ever will. A little while ago, I'd say a year ago, I was standing in a hallway in my house where there were 2 doors on the right-hand side going down and a door at the end, where the first door was the pantry and the second door was the bathroom. I was standing by the pantry door. I think I was debating what food I wanted or something, and my dad had taken my dog, Mason, on a walk. The door at the end of the hall opens into a mudroom, which then has the side door where we usually go in. Well, I heard the sound of the side door opening, and I heard my dog's collar jingling, and then the door at the end of the hallway opened up, presumably by my dad, and I saw my dog Mason run down the hallways, and I put out my hand and pet him as he ran by. He continues on, and I see him run in the direction of the stairs, and I assume he ran upstairs to my mom. For some reason I felt like something was off because he just ran forward like a simulation and didn't stop and say hello to me, so I called to my mom and asked if Mason was up there with her, and she said no and that my dad hadn't arrived home with Mason yet. My heart stopped, and I realized that something was wrong. I waited, and later my dad came in and let Mason in. So my dad hadn't gone home and let my dog in even though I had seen, heard, and pet my dog. 3 of my senses had been off, and I can't to this day understand how. At this point, I just accept the fact that we're probably in a computer simulation or we are being experimented on. I've never hallucinated anything like that before, and I haven't since, but I can't get over it, and I won't let myself convince myself that it was nothing because it clearly was something. Cousin was lost in the forest. Hello. My family is from the Caribbean, and my aunt, Jane, told me about an experience she had as a child. This had to have happened almost 50 years ago when she was around 8 years old. So Jane lived in a small village that was surrounded by forests, sugarcane fields, and rice paddy fields. One day, Jane and her cousins decided to play a game. Jane and her cousins knew this forest extremely well since they played there every day. After a while, they noticed their cousin Jack was missing. They searched everywhere for Jack and called out to him, but he was nowhere to be found. Eventually, after an hour of searching, they decided to send one of their cousins to run and get help. Jane's uncle arrived a little while after and began helping search for Jack. Another hour passed, and the uncle came upon a thick growth of thorny vines and bushes. He heard shouting coming from nearby. There were so many thorns and vines, and it was so thick that he had used his cutlass, like a machete knife, to cut through. There was no way anyone, even a child, could get through, that's how thick it was. When he finally cleared a path, he entered a small clear patch, and Jack was sitting in the very center. He asked Jack how he got there, and he had no memory of what had happened after they started playing the game. He also had 0 scratches on him, and his clothes were clean with no dirt on them. There was no way he could have gotten in there. My aunt says my family thought it might have been a duende, which in folklore are these fairy-like creatures that have feet that face backwards and try and lure people to the forest. Does anyone know of any missing 411 cases in the Caribbean? I thought this kind of fitted, though I'm still new to the missing 411 topic. I have spent approximately a year engaging in through hiking, biking, and camping in national forests, parks, and wilderness areas, and I find the topic of missing 411 to be fascinating. I am eager to share my experiences with other outdoor enthusiasts. I've spent quite a lot of time outdoors in the past 2 years. In 2016, I thru-hiked the covering 205 days and 2,189 miles up the East Coast. This year I rode my bike up the 800-mile Arizona Trail, then rode from Santa Barbara to Vancouver, BC, along the Pacific Ocean. Now I'm 1,100 miles into a southbound Continental Divide Trail hike, having gone through Montana and Wyoming and about to enter Colorado soon. I've always been fascinated with the paranormal and started listening to Coast AM at 17 or 18. No story on that show has captivated me as much as George Knapp's interviews with David Paulides. The phenomenon is just bizarre and intriguing. So I'll just tell the stories that come to mind in no particular order. 1. In Yellowstone, a few weeks back, I listened to a Mysterious Universe podcast covering human and animal mutilation. Super creepy, especially if humans are really being found mutilated like cattle. So of course I tell my hiking buddies all about the episode as the sun sets and really freak them out. The night is nice, stars are out. The next day I came across a dead rodent right in the middle of the trail that looked to have all the signs of animal mutilation. Eyes are removed, there's a hole at the back of his head that appears to be black/burned. Eye sockets also have a black, burned look to them. I obviously didn't check if his spine and organs were there, but there was no blood and no insects on the body. Who knows if that was just like the work of bugs in the sun, but I thought the timing was so strange, because over thousands of miles I've seen plenty of dead animals in various states of decay, but this rodent looked perfectly preserved except it was missing eyes, and there was just that hole at the back of his head, maybe half an inch wide, that appeared blackened and cauterized or burnt. I've never seen this before, and there's the timing of it all. 2 places totally have vibes to them. Some places that we walk through are straight up hair-raising, and I can never figure out why, yet I've confirmed it with other hikers. I'll usually ask, "Hey, did you feel weird back there?" And they always go, "Yeah, I did. It just didn't feel right." 1 place in Utah comes to mind. It was a short day hike I did with my girlfriend in Canyonlands NP. Forget the name, but the trail took you up the side of an old crater. I think they theorize it was a meteor strike ages ago, but they don't really know. Anyway, we got to a spot, sat down, and were immediately overcome with this incredible lethargy to the point where we both wanted to fall asleep on that rock. I'm a pretty disciplined hiker, so I stood up and said we can't dally here. Oddly, I also had this gut feeling that we shouldn't fall asleep there. And also weirdly, my girlfriend said offhand in a joking manner to some other day hikers coming up the trail, "Be careful up there, there's a vortex that will suck you in and put you to sleep." She meant vortex in the hiker context of a town that'll suck you in and keep you doing unplanned zeros. But still, odd choice of language, right? And I'm reminded of cases of UFO and Faerie abductions that start with people inexplicably falling asleep in the woods in the middle of the day. 3. Speaking of weird places, the crosses through an area known as the Bennington Triangle. Going south you'll cross over Glastonbury Mountain and then enter the town of Bennington. Apparently there were 4 or 5 missing 411 style disappearances there in the 1940s, Google it, really interesting stories. And the natives avoided the area because they believed devils lived on the mountain. When I walked through the day before, I had written a blog about how the trail was teaching me to follow my gut and how following my gut always seemed to save me from storms and other things like that and just generally turn out good. Well, this day I was planning to go through a small town called Manchester Center, then climb onto Glastonbury Mountain and camp on the mountain. In Manchester Center, I ate a burrito and experienced the worst stomach cramps I've ever had. Tried using the bathroom to wait it out, nothing. So book a room in a motel. Literally the second I've paid and get to the room, my stomach pain goes away. This was a cramp so bad that I was walking hunched over that just disappeared in a matter of seconds. But I'd already paid, so I stayed. No diarrhea or anything that day. Everything was 100% normal after I changed my plans. Climbed the mountain and went into Bennington the next day. Only after I realized that I would have been on the mountain on the night of the full moon. Is that relevant? I'm uncertain, but it struck me as remarkably peculiar that, after writing about trusting my instincts directly prompted me to refrain from climbing that mountain. Oh, on the way down is where the long trail and the intersect, and that intersection is where a young woman disappeared in the 40s without a trace. Weird. 4. Now that I'm thinking of weird places with bad vibes, I'm reminded of this small 5-mile loop I do at home in Missouri. When I walk this, I usually always stop about 3 miles in and turn around. No real reason, that's just what I always did. Went in there maybe 4 years ago with an ex-girlfriend, and we ate about 1.5 grams of shrooms each. The first hours of the trip were great, hanging out about a mile into the loop, then we decided to hike more and entered the section that I unintentionally avoided. It was so strange. The only way I can describe it is that it felt like evil descended on us. I'm getting goosebumps as I write this. I felt this deep pit of despair and depression come out of nowhere, and I just knew that that year was when I was going to die. I knew that our relationship was over. We both got real quiet and didn't talk for about half an hour. Then I came to this ledge, and I kept getting these horrible images of her running full speed, charging off this like 80 feet ledge. Then all of a sudden the oppressive energy lifted, and we both just burst out like, "Did you feel that? What the hell?" So she also felt that incredibly negative energy and felt that we were done. Our reactions were very interesting. We both felt like we should focus more on spirituality and develop a stronger spiritual base. I kept having the thought that the greatest lie is that there is no good and evil in this world. If you believe this, then you're truly vulnerable to true evil. So after this experience we got into hypnosis a little. She could fall into a trance very easily. One session I took her back to that day, and she absolutely freaked. She said that we were attacked by a demon who attacked those who are undecided. Now I'm not religious at all, and still am not, and I think this is her Catholic upbringing coloring her experience, but I do think there was something very evil there that day in the woods. Also, it's fascinating that I just avoided that place intuitively, right? Even with these experiences and all the content I listened to regarding the paranormal and missing 411, I don't feel at all threatened or in danger in the wild. I'd say 99% of my time out there I feel as comfortable as if I were sitting on my couch at home. We were built to be in nature, and the woods and the wild really are not threatening places. Spend enough time out there and you truly will feel right at home. I think this phenomenon, whatever it is, has an element of choice and free will. I've always maintained that I absolutely do not want any truly weird encounters anywhere, and I tend to think that this mindset matters. Like how mediums say they can repress and shut down their ability. Oh yes, that reminds me, we encountered a hiker in Montana who accompanied us for a while. She mentioned that she previously engaged in extensive spiritual practices. When she was highly sensitive, she was able to perceive various entities and spirits in the woods, which was quite overwhelming for her, leading her to cease those activities. I'm not sure how to interpret her experience, but it's intriguing nonetheless. So I think because I truly don't want any encounters, I'm protected. I think perhaps this is why children seem to disappear more. It would be much easier to coerce and trick a child than an adult. It seems folklore always talks about permission, like how vampires can't enter your domain without your permission. How fairies try to trick you into eating and drinking their food, and if you do, then you're stuck in their realm. How entities will try to lure you off the path. It seems the common thread is that element of free will on your part. Like you have to willingly participate or give permission in some fashion even if you're tricked into it. That's something that's given me a lot of peace, because I do feel very attuned to my intuition, and the longer I hike, the more intuitive I become. I think this sixth sense really does help keep me safe out there. And perhaps our modern people are at greater risk in the wild now because we have let this natural sixth sense deteriorate. I also feel intuitively that much of this weirdness has a spiritual element. I cannot articulate how or why, but based on everything I've experienced and all the information I've read, I tend to believe that this is not merely a flesh and blood material phenomenon, rather, it is more deeply connected to our spirit and the spiritual plane, whatever that may be. Anyway, those are my stories. I'll be headed straight through the CO Mountains, which have loads of missing 411 cases, and then through the native reservation lands in New Mexico with all their skinwalker lore, so we'll see how that goes, ha. I'd be real curious to hear stories from others who have spent a lot of time in the woods. Klamath National Forest Case. A rugged outdoorsman and writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, Tom Steenstra, was camping, fishing, and walking trails in the Klamath National Forest, usually encountering nothing but the wildlife. While driving down a dead-end trail in their vehicle, Tom and his buddy were appalled to discover that they had a flat tire, and during their attempt to fix it, the jack broke. They knew they were, to put it in the vernacular, screwed. However, less than 20 seconds after the jack broke, an ancient pickup truck approached from behind, and a man and a woman dressed in Native American clothing, both remarkably handsome, got out. Without saying a word, they got at Jack and changed the tire. They returned to their truck, still no words, waved, drove past, and went on down the dead-end road ahead of them. Steenstra and his friend were flabbergasted but got in their own vehicle and continued after. Their helpers were now out of sight somewhere up the road. Steenstra drove on right to the dead end. Their helpers were nowhere in sight, and there had been nowhere to egress from the road. Their trip to the dead end was only 2 minutes long. They were sure that they could not have missed them. Glitch in the matrix. I know this sounds strange, and I hope I'm not the only one who feels this way. The other day, I saw a black SUV with tinted windows driving erratically near Challenger Park in Bakersfield, California, as it headed toward the auto mall. As it was heading that way, I noticed that it looked like it was going to jump the curb and go into the park, and as quickly as that happened, I shit you not, the whole vehicle just vanished. Like magic or something out of a movie. The only reason why I'm sharing it on here is because the car behind me honked at me and I pulled over. He asked if I just saw what he saw, and the vehicle disappeared. I said yes, and he was like, I thought I was on drugs or something, but I saw it, and he saw it. It was the scariest thing that I've witnessed, and I hope someone out there has seen something similar in that area or anything like that. It has left me freaking out. This happened a few days ago, and I've been contemplating even writing this due to people saying I'm crazy. But I hope someone else has had a similar experience. Spent 2 hours driving in an empty roundabout, not being able to get out. This happened in Bucharest in the mid-2000s, and it's my go-to weird glitch in the matrix story that I cannot explain. It's 11 p.m. on a Friday, I'm driving home, and I get a call from my best friend. It's someone else on the line telling me my friend is extremely drunk and acting like an idiot in a bar, and if it's possible to come and get him, as people are calling the cops and he doesn't want to leave. I go to the Old Town Center, I see my buddy with 3 of his university buddies outside of the bar, and they're completely wasted. There's a police car parked in front of me, but it's traffic police, so the cops are just watching me collect these messes and struggle to get them in the car. One of them throws up on the sidewalk. I'm stressed, as earlier that day I had already gotten a ticket. I made a small mistake in the Victory Eye roundabout during rush hour, I'm being specific, as this place will come up later, and the cop decided to make an example out of me, which really scared me a bit. So I managed to get them in the car, and the moment I start the car, the cops block me, and they check me for alcohol, they make me blow in the tester, they check my papers and stuff, and one of the cops is really trying to give me a ticket for anything. He's now saying I'm not supposed to be on this specific road or something like that. It's bullshit, he just wants to burn me, but the other cop comes and tells him to let me go because I had already gotten a traffic ticket that day, and apparently they couldn't give me 2 tickets for minor traffic violations in 24 hours, which is a rule I've never heard of before or since then. This was mildly weird, but not glitch in the matrix stuff. Nevertheless, I escort them to the opposite side of town where they reside within the student complex. There have been no further incidents. It is now approximately 12:15 a.m., and I am en route home. I get to Pieta Victory Eye, which is the absolute central point of the city. It's a giant square that's a roundabout from which every main boulevard of the city starts, so each exit from this square/roundabout is a huge 6-lane boulevard, and each boulevard takes you to a different neighborhood, and each boulevard is very unique looking, and it's very well marked, so it's almost impossible for someone who lives in this city to take the wrong exit in this place. It's also 12:30 a.m. by now, and it's completely empty, so there's zero traffic or anything that could distract me from taking the wrong exit. I enter the roundabout, I see my exit, and I take it like I've previously done it hundreds of times. I get on the boulevard, but I immediately know this is not my boulevard, it's a completely different one that takes me in a very wrong direction. The only option I have is to turn around to the square. I say, okay, that's weird, but okay, I've had a very long day. I was in university, and I also worked. There were the 2 police encounters, both very stressful, and almost 2 tickets, and the whole commotion with the drunk friends. I turn around, go back in the roundabout, drive until my exit again, and take my exit, and I'm on the other boulevard again, the same thing as the first time. I say, okay, I'm a complete dumbass for doing this, I need to focus now. Turn around, get into the roundabout, drive until my exit, take my exit, I'm focused now on all the details, but nope, I'm on the other boulevard again. Now I start to get annoyed at myself, and I start screaming in the car out of frustration. I turn around, get into the roundabout, and drive slowly. I get to my exit slowly, and I take my exit slowly and focused and sharp and clear, and I'm on the other boulevard again. This is freaking me out by now, as you can imagine. For 2 hours, I spent there doing the same thing, and I haven't seen one person or one car in that time, which is another strange thing from that night. I do not believe there has ever been a 2-hour period in that location without a vehicle passing. This area is effectively the focal point of traffic in a city with a population exceeding 2 million residents. I was having a breakdown, I was almost crying from anger at the end, screaming my lungs out every time it happened, and then I finally got my exit, and I found myself on my street, and in 5 minutes I was home, and the clock said 2:40 a.m. I simply cannot explain it. I had a phone, but it was late and I was furious, and I really didn't know how to explain to someone what was happening. it would have sounded like I was on drugs or I was having a psychotic episode, and I didn't want to make a bigger deal out of it, plus it seemed like such a stupid problem to have. I just couldn't express it or explain it, and I still can't. Thank you for listening. My son and I both lost 20 minutes. 2 years ago, my kids and I were visiting where my mom grew up in Maui. We stayed in a condo complex on the beach between the crater and the road to Hana. That night, my son, daughter, and I walked on the beach to have a cigarette and saw a man who was staying in another condo in the complex as well. We spoke to him for a few minutes and, while talking, noticed a group to our right having a bonfire on the beach. After we finished our small talk with the man, my daughter walked down the beach a ways, and my son and I were looking up at the stars. I noticed a big red planet, probably Mars, and put my arm around him while pointing it out. That was the moment we both froze, I guess. I only know it because that is the moment we resumed again in the same position. With my arm out pointing to Mars and my other arm around his neck. But nothing was like it was the second before. The man was gone. The people were gone, and the bonfire smoldered out. My 24-year-old daughter was gone also. Only my 18-year-old son and I were still on the beach. Still staring into the sky with my arm still outstretched. We snapped out of it, and both of us did not know what happened. Our brains were foggy, and we were trying to piece together the events. My son looked at his watch, and it was 20 minutes later, which was shocking in and of itself. We decided to go back to the condo, and on the way, we spotted the man we had just been speaking to moments earlier on the third-floor balcony of his own condo. He waved at us, and we waved back. We both were feeling ill, and my son vomited in the bushes. We made it back to our rental condo and found my daughter in her bed lying down. We asked her what she remembers since she had to pass us to get to the path back to the complex, and she told us she walked back in a hypnotic, robotic daze and did not see us. She thought we left the beach without her. And on her way back to the condo, an oddly dressed man in a full suit, tie, and hat passed her and nodded at her as he headed towards the beach where she just came from. She said when she got to the condo and did not find us, she was so tired and just had to lie down. To this day, my son and I do not know what happened, but the scariest part is that it happened together and we both experienced it. What is worse, going through something alone where you can second guess yourself to gain some peace of mind, or going through it with someone else where there is no chance of plausible deniability to give your psyche a break. I heard a laugh at 2 a.m., but there was no one around. I'm a rational person. I sort of believe in the paranormal and am open-minded, but 9/10 times it's the wind, your brain, or simply another person. The paranormal only comes into play for me when nothing else makes sense. Like that laugh I heard at 2 a.m., and there was no one there to make that sound. This is sort of long, bear with me. I and my father never had a very good relationship. We are very different people. Throughout all the time I lived at his place, the house I grew up in, I never felt welcome. However, school was a lot closer to my dad's place, and all my friends lived there, so when my parents got divorced when I was 16, I decided to stay with him. Now this house is quite a hot spot for weird shit, so I have my fair share of stories, but they can all be debunked as overactive imagination, etc., in my opinion. I don't pay much attention to them, although they make for great stories to share at parties. But this one is a bit different. This one is about the first and only time I was ever truly afraid of the paranormal existing. So, after 4 years of constant fights and bad energy, I decided it was time to move out of my father's house and in with my mom. I'd not exactly been looking forward to that conversation with him, so I decided to slowly pack all my things before I did so. When the time came, I could leave on the same day. My mom said she'd come to support me, and we had had that conversation planned for the Sunday that week. What I want to tell you happened the Saturday night before. Now, what you need to understand in advance is that I despised being confined to my room. Again, I'm a rational person, but I felt so watched in there that I couldn't sleep. It would constantly smell bad. I turned over the entire room more than once, but I never seemed to be able to find the source of the smell, only for it to disappear and come back a couple of days later, and I would often actually start feeling nauseous when walking up the stairs to the first story my room was on. I want to add that annoyed me to no end since I also hated being downstairs since my father was there. Occasionally I actually slept downstairs on the couch because I couldn't bear sleeping in my room. Not because I was scared or anything, I wasn't. Especially the feeling of being watched. It never felt dangerous. For lack of a better metaphor, it felt sort of like when you sleep over at a friend's place for the first time as a child and their parents are standing at the door to see if you're sleeping. You don't know them really, they don't necessarily make you feel safer, and you don't want to upset them, but you're also not scared of them. You know they don't really mean any harm. They're just there, watching. That's what it felt like. I still preferred sleeping downstairs, where I felt more alone, so to speak. Regardless of that feeling, I went to sleep in my room that Saturday night. Now I don't know why I did this, but for some reason I felt the need to say, out loud, I'm leaving. I'm moving out tomorrow, and I'll probably never come back. Perhaps just to make sure that this was actually happening. I was finally leaving this place behind. Then, after around an hour of social media on my phone, I decided to go to sleep. I had just put down my phone and turned off my light on the bedside table when I heard it from behind me. A laugh. A chuckle, almost. The only way I can describe it is in the manner of your laughter upon viewing a humorous advertisement on television. It wasn't a full-body laugh, but I was definitely amused. I don't think I could ever make you understand how ducking terrifying that was. I froze and didn't dare to make a sound for a full 10 minutes. It was dark and quiet, and I had tears in my eyes. That night, I didn't think of ghosts or demons. I thought killer. I was convinced someone had been waiting under my bed. For the right moment. I'm not the most religious person, but I think I sent a prayer up there anyway, ready to take his hand. As time passed on and nothing else happened, I started to calm down slightly. Even though my heart was beating faster than Usain Bolt runs at the Olympics. After around 15 minutes, I slowly turned around to see nothing but my wall. That was an outer wall, BTW. I looked under my bed and found nothing. I got up and looked around my room. I left my room and searched the whole ducking house. Nothing. My first idea was maybe it had been a TV? But mine had been off, and so was my brother's, who had been sound asleep when I peeked into his room. My father and his girlfriend had been out, and no one else lived in the house. There's at least 10 meters of ground between my house and our neighbors, and we're well isolated. I could barely hear thunderstorms in that room, not to mention a neighbor laughing in his house at 2 a.m. It had been a grown-up man's laugh, and it had sounded close. Not like TV or anything. It sounds like someone is talking right behind you. The sound resonates clearly and loudly. I've also considered sleep paralysis, but I've never had that in my life, and, as I said, I hadn't even had time to fall asleep, as I just put down my phone. Also, falling asleep takes me ages, at least 20 to 30 minutes every night. There is no one I would suspect of pranking me with this, so I'd. For context, I told my mom about the fact that I felt watched in the house, and she told me that the grounds used to be used as a small base for World War II soldiers. I live in Austria, and maybe that's why the house was so active in general. Again, I'm a rational person and not sure this has anything to do with it, but I know some of you do, and I want to give you anything you need. It's been over 2 years, and I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. Anyone got an idea? Mysterious trails, strange calls from the wilds, and the almost vanished. August 20th, 2025. The wilderness areas of our world have always been associated with mystery and legend since ancient times. These are wild places that seem at times to exist outside of our realm and typical reality, and it is easy to see why they have long drawn to them strange stories, myths, and legends. At times it seems that these remote places of our planet seem to call out to the unsuspecting, deceiving and putting out a siren call to those who would follow it to their doom. This has long been posited for cases of what I call the almost vanished, those who seem to have been on the verge of vanishing off the face of the earth but who somehow found their way back. Here we will look at a selection of bizarre accounts of the forest seemingly trying to draw in people for purposes we will probably never understand. One strange account of this happening comes from a person who lives in the coastal resort town of Bournemouth, on the south coast of England. She says that her godfather has a cabin that sits nestled within a tract of wooded land called the New Forest, and she decided to spend a few weeks there along with her Malamute, Sky. On the very first day that she arrived, she decided to take some photos of the area to show her mother and found her way to a field with horses, along with Sky, at around 11 a.m. It was here where she would have a strange experience, when something began to call her from the surrounding trees. She writes of what happened next. So I'm taking photos of wild horses, and I hear "Hey, come here," seemingly coming from the right of me. I look, and that part of the forest is deeper, and I couldn't see anything standing or hiding that way. Sky, on the other hand, heard it and jerked that way in the lead. Come closer. This way. I focused myself now to look through the trees and long grass, and there was now a simple stone path that weirdly didn't have any grass or growth around it. You could clearly see a cobbled path. So, Sky and I started making our way down that path. I didn't notice at the time, but I could clearly hear Sky whimpering and nothing else. It felt as if all other sounds were completely muted. I know I'm not making any sense typing this out, and I'm sorry. It was like everything else around me, the birds, the wind, and the trees, was just fading away, and I was in some weird sort of haze. Just a bit further, a woman's voice, seemingly coming out of nowhere, whispered to us while giggling. Sky shook me out of my trance by stopping, putting her hackles up, and growling at something. I shook my head, and suddenly the haze and confusion had disappeared. Although we remained on the path, a strange sense of dread began to creep over me. That and the sky growing just made me think, nope, and we ran back to the clearing we came from. Come back. A woman screamed at us, and it seemed to follow and echo around us as we both were running back. We made it to the clearing and back to the cabin. I double-locked all the doors and pulled the curtains and blinds over the windows due to the fact that I thought we were being followed and whatever, or whoever, wanted us down that path so badly would come back for us. They never did. I immediately checked my phone, taking advantage of the newfound service and Wi-Fi connection. Multiple calls, texts, and WhatsApps all came through at once. Tons were asking where we were and if we arrived safe, and my boyfriend was asking why he hadn't heard from me. We were in the woods for what seemed like an hour and mere seconds on that path. It was now 9 p.m., and I have no recollection of the missing time we had encountered. What was this voice? Why did it want her to go down that path, and what happened to her during that missing time? We will probably never know. 2. In another concerning instance, a hiker in the Grand Teton National Park in northwest Wyoming experienced a personal encounter. On this occasion he was out with 4 friends in 2017 taking their annual road trip, along which they stopped at the Grand Tetons to stay for a couple of days. While they were there, they made plans to hike along some of the less traveled trails in the area, deciding to try out a 13-mile hike called the Two Ocean and Emma Matilda Lakes Outside Loop. They departed in the morning hours on a clear day and made it to the first lake without incident, stopping there to take a break and enjoy the scenery. As they admired the majestic wilderness surrounding them, something very bizarre began to occur. The weather suddenly turned dark and ominous, despite having been clear just moments before, and clouds and rain began to fall. Oddly, this weather passed just as suddenly, leaving the sky clear again. It was all very odd, but they didn't think much of it at the time. They continued until they came upon an anomalous trail that did not appear in their maps, and they decided to check it out. This is where things would get very strange indeed. The witness says. After a few more miles, the trail became extremely narrow, approximately 1 person wide, and the forest on either side became thick, like the thickest forest you've ever seen. I remember remarking it looked like Blair Witch Country, and the forest almost seemed to consume the trail. It's at this point, walking along the trail, that I and one friend who was in the front of the pack distinctly heard a clear, loud, and audible woman's voice. It sounded as if a woman was approximately 15 meters ahead of us, around the bend, speaking to someone. We continued walking, and when we got around the bend, we were stunned to see nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood up, and we looked at each other in shock and reiterated we definitely heard a woman. The other 3 guys then approached and asked us if we were okay, as we were pale, and we told them what we had heard. They then told us they too had heard a woman as they approached, and they thought the 2 of us who were ahead had been talking to a fellow hiker. We all looked around frantically, but the forest had turned silent. There was no wind, and everything seemed to be going slowly. The weird thing was there was one very tall tree about 50 meters from us, which was swaying from side to side, but as I said, there was no wind, and the forest was silent. It wasn't just moving slightly, but as if it were caught in a large gust. The clouds had blown back over and were an ominous gray. We exchanged concerned glances, and after calling out a few times to ensure there wasn't an injured hiker nearby, we began hiking relatively quickly away from the spot. Over the next 8 miles, we encountered only one other person near the trailhead and a bear, which was the only section of the trail that made us all feel uncomfortable. We returned to camp that night and couldn't make sense of what we heard. To this day it still stumps me and gives me goosebumps. The witness goes on to speculate that they had perhaps come very close to vanishing like many others in national parks and wonders if there was a cluster of such disappearances in the area at the time. Mysterious voices in the woods figure into a lot of these bizarre cases. 3. We next come to an account by a user. At the time he says he had gone out on a short hike in the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont, around the base of Mount Glastonbury, looking to take a look at the remains of an old ghost town and railroad bed there from the 19th century. She was not alone at the time, bringing along her dog, BB, and when they stopped along a logging road to take the trail in, the weather was sunny and clear. As they hiked along, he says that he began to hear an eerie whistling sound that immediately had his dog agitated and pulling at the leash to run off into the trees. He had the distinct impression that the whistle was meant to draw the dog away from him, but after a few minutes there were no more sounds, and he tried to put the odd incident out of his head and continue the hike. However, the weirdness was just beginning. He says of what happened next. Not 10 steps later I heard a woman's voice from the other side of the trail. "Hello? Come here. We are just off the trail." Then I heard what sounded like the playful laughter of another woman. The tone of the calls was playful, almost seductive. "Hello, come down here. What's your name?" I was curious and even a little intrigued to check it out. The voice was very pleasant, but after a split second, I stopped myself from moving. Looking to the left where the voices were coming from, I could almost see a path through the trees, down the ridge, a perfectly straight line. There was no noise, not even the rustling of leaves or chirping of birds. I started to feel lightheaded and confused. BB barked again, and I snapped out of it. A feeling of complete dread then overtook me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the Ruger LC9 that was in a pocket holster, held the pistol to my side, and clicked off the safety. As soon as I did that, I began to hear things again, leaves rustling and the sounds of birds tweeting. Looking to the left again, the path that had just been there was gone. After that, I decided to end my hike, and we booked it back to the car without incident. The strangest thing was yet to come. When I got back to my car and drove off the mountain and had cell phone service again, my phone had been blown up with missed messages from my girlfriend and brother asking where I was and why I was not back yet. I checked the time on my phone, it was 4 p.m. I had started my hike around 8 a.m. I'd been gone for 8 hours and could only account for a couple of hours of the time. To this day I have no explanation of what happened. I no longer hike and have taken up golf instead. Was this trying to lure him into the woods, and what would have happened if he had followed it further? Who knows? These cases don't always involve voices, but they almost always involve some irresistible force that seems to be pulling people deeper into the woods. 4. There is an account from a witness who says that this happened when he was a kid and out on a camping trip with his parents along with another family. At the time of his strange experience, he had been out playing with some other kids near the campground but got into an argument with another boy and decided to walk back by himself. He took a U-shaped road that went around the campground and had woods on the other side. He explains the series of events that would then play out. At the very center of the U is a park. Perfect. I think I'll just sit on the swings until I think enough time has passed to go back. As I'm on the swings, I notice a path directly across from me. I get up and start walking along this dirt path. There are reeds on either side of me, and I have my hands stretched out as I walk dead center of this path. My hands can just barely touch these reeds unless I move closer to one side. I walk for about 10 minutes, and then I arrive at a pond. Crystal clear water, and I have this urge to drink it. It looks so refreshing. I kneel down, and suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck go straight up. It was like I snapped back into myself. What am I doing? Why am I about to drink pond water? Why did I walk down this path? I begin to feel increasingly uncomfortable, prompting me to turn around and retrace my original steps. Allow me to clarify. There was only one path. Straight. I made no turns, I didn't walk around this pond. I simply walked to the end of the path, got freaked out about something, and turned around. Suddenly, various types of bugs appeared around me. I kept walking, and I noticed the dirt path was getting more and more narrow. The reeds and tall grass brush against my arms, and I feel a constant buzzing in my ears from the bugs. The path gets so narrow that I have to walk sideways to avoid the reeds. I yell out help, and I hear a voice ask if I'm okay. I reply I'm lost, and a woman says, "Just walk straight, honey, I see you." I see nothing, it's just tall grass and reeds. I walk a few feet and see the road. I am scratched from head to toe, and there's a woman by the playground asking what happened. She takes a Kleenex out of her pocketbook and starts wiping some of the scratches, and I tell her what happened. I look behind me and see no path. I'm at the same park. I'm in front of the swing I was just on. The woman looks at me and tells me that I shouldn't even think about it and to just forget it happened because I'm fine now. However, she strongly emphasized that I should not discuss it. I've always been on the fence about it. I'm sure there was one path in and one path out. The bugs could have steered me off course. Maybe I'm being paranoid? Or was it something more sinister that nearly trapped me for good? What was going on here? What was this irresistible force luring the witness to? 5. In another story told by an individual, it seems as if some sort of entity was trying to draw the storyteller away. He says that this happened during a hike he had with his father at Mount Shasta, in Northern California, when he was just a kid. The hike started off normally enough, but they would encounter some oddities along the way, such as a group of boulders arranged in a circle that they had never noticed there before. They then passed by a group of other hikers who were headed down the steep incline, but when they looked back, he says the hikers were way farther down the trail than they should have been in such a short amount of time. They were a bit unsettled, but they just shrugged and kept going, and this is where it goes from creepy to strange. The witness says, "As we reached the top of the cliff, we noticed another strange rock arrangement off to the side of the trail. This time, There were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued along the trail and encountered another incline that featured a switchback leading to the top of a different cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the rocks, staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features. But it was almost as if he had none. Like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed him out to my dad, and then the man quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments, I was out of it, and I have no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Joshua. Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I came to. I was standing right at the edge of a cliff. It was a huge drop. Enough to kill me or seriously injure me. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail. He told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for the man. But he wasn't there. There was nowhere for him to go except up or down the trail. It didn't make any sense, he just disappeared. I have no idea what was going on that trail, and I have no explanation for it. I've told this many times to family and friends, and no one has an explanation. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They think it could be a portal to other dimensions, and spirits guard it, threatening anyone who tries to climb the volcano. Do we believe in portals and strange entities, or is there another possibility? In other cases, it still seems like the forest is actively trying to keep people from leaving. 6. In the Missing 411 forum, Op said that this happened when he was a teenager at a camp. At one point during the trip, he went off into the woods with two girls named Amy and Harriet, exploring the area, and while nothing particularly unusual happened when they were out there, things took a sinister turn when they decided to head back to camp. The witness explains what happened thusly. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place. Like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, while shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road, as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest, however, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confusedly that we'd only been gone 25 minutes, and that our spare time was still going on. To this day this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal, however, this feeling was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and those hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. What happened to these people? There is probably no pat answer that can explain all of it, and it likely encompasses various phenomena. What we can be sure of is that it sometimes seems that the woods is an ominous, sinister, even malevolent and malicious place that, through whatever strange forces, seems to want to pull people in and keep them, using an arsenal of lures and strange powers. Are these ghosts, fairies, some sort of interdimensional phenomena, or just overactive imaginations and misunderstandings? It is hard to say, but based on accounts like these, it seems wise to be alert next time you're in the woods. Was this a glitch in the Matrix, a reality shift, or just me losing my mind? I've had a fairly stressful but not particularly eventful or unusual day for me. I came home from work and decided to have a glass of wine. I was feeling somewhat emotional, but nothing really unusual or new to me. I was overthinking, daydreaming, and spacing out. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my living room chair, just kind of drifting in my mind. The doorbell startled me. Out of the window from my spot in the chair, I could see a stranger standing by my front door. I didn't answer, as I wasn't expecting company, and I didn't even move from my chair. He hovered for a few moments, then got in a car parked at the curb and left. I watched him turn around the block and drive past my house again, going in the opposite direction. I decided not to think about it, didn't move from the chair, and continued spacing. About 20 minutes later, I was still on the same first glass of wine. I was not intoxicated by any means, I was barely drinking, to be honest. I noticed a woman walk past my house and stop in front of it to stare at it. For a moment, I thought, why the hell are you staring? When I realized that she was walking a dog who apparently took a moment to relieve itself on my front lawn. I decided to get up from my chair and walk toward the window to see if she was going to clean that shit up. As I got up, I accidentally spilled a drop of red wine on my living room rug. My eye immediately went to the wine stain, and I thought, shit. I need to clean this up. I did take a moment to watch the woman at the window, and then I went to the kitchen quickly to grab a paper towel. While I was doing that, I noticed that the time was about 6:57 p.m. on my stove clock. I grabbed a paper towel and went back to my living room to pat the wine stain in the rug. I noticed that the woman was way down the street. When I looked down at my rug, I realized that there was no wine stain. The rug is patterned, but nonetheless, I knew exactly where it would have been, and it was no longer there. I inspected the rug and didn't find the stain. I thought for a moment that maybe there was never a wine stain, maybe because I felt like I may have spilled a drop of wine on the rug, my eye may have gone to a random pattern spot on the rug, and I assumed it was a wine stain. Although I can clearly remember the sensation of the wine spilling out of the glass and the clear wine drop on the rug. I looked at my cat chilling nearby, who was now lying in a different position, and said semi-jokingly, "Have we shifted or something?" I decided not to think too much of it because this may not mean anything at all and went back to the kitchen to put the paper towel down. I glanced at the stove clock and realized that it was blinking as if it had been reset. This usually only happens when I unplug the stove or the power goes out. I did not unplug the stove. I did not notice any momentary power outages because my air conditioner kept humming uninterrupted. Most notably, the time on the microwave clock just above the stove was not blinking. It was showing 7:07. That indicated that at least 10 minutes had passed, even though it felt like 1 to 2 minutes at the most. However, the blinking time on the stove was 12:57. Which means that if the stove clock had reset in the moment that I stepped out of the kitchen to clean the wine stain, it would have reset to 12 o'clock. But the 12:57 was telling me that the clock had reset an hour earlier. There was no way that it took me an hour to walk the few feet from my kitchen to my living room, look at the rug, not find the stain, and go back to the kitchen. There was also a 10-minute discrepancy between the microwave clock and the stove clock, indicating that the stove had been out for 10 minutes before the clock reset. I paused for a moment wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me or if I was drunk. I am not, I haven't even finished the first glass of wine yet. And the stove clock is still blinking. Is this some kind of glitch in my brain or in the reality around me? Are they one and the same? Did we lose time, or did the timeline shift? So I just started listening to this channel and thought I should share something that happened to me a few years back and get some opinions. In August of 2016, a group of friends and I went camping in Sequoia. We got to our campsite and set everything up, and then at one point before sundown, 2 friends and I decided to go back down the hill a few miles to a general store. We knew the store was there because we passed it on our way up, and there was only one road. I was in the back seat, and my friend who was driving was playing music through his Bluetooth. On the way down, we all unexpectedly noticed a banner on the right side. I truly wish I remembered what it said, but I know we all talked about it. So we get to the store and buy more beer, tortillas, and a few other items. Doesn't really matter. We get back in the car and start heading up the mountain. After driving for X amount of time, we all look to our left and say, "Hey, didn't we just pass the entrance to our campsite?" So my friend turns back around, and sure enough, it was the road that led us back into our camp. At this point we're all a bit confused. As we're driving into camp, we all get this really eerie feeling. Everything seems so dark and quiet. No one was around even though the campground was quite full upon leaving. We joked that maybe we died and were now in purgatory, but really, we couldn't understand how we got back so quickly. It took us longer to go down than it did to get back up, which should be impossible. We know this for sure because we then went through my friend's playlist and counted the time of all the songs we listened to on the way down and on the way up. We also never passed the banner we had passed on the way down. I tried to play that off as maybe I wasn't paying any attention and was looking down at my phone in that moment, but surely one of them would have noticed. I should add that we had no service, so I'd be on my phone for anyway. It was also super dark when we got back, but we made sure to leave with enough time to make it back before the sun was fully gone. So how did we get back so fast but also take so long that the sun was gone? After a few minutes of staying in the car and going through everything that happened, it's like the sound started to come back, and we heard the rest of our group behind a few bushes at the campfire ring and could see the fire burning. It was just all a pretty weird experience that we just joke about now, but since listening to the stories, I haven't stopped thinking about it. Maybe it was a glitch and we shifted somehow. Oh, there was also a meteor shower later that night, if that could cause glitches lol. I really don't know. The Fae Trail, the Rising Tree, and the Whisper Shack. So the Fae Trail is what my buddy called it. I'd quit that is, but it's what he called it. But anyway, we were going for a hike around a lake we lived near, and about an hour and a half in, he stops and looks into the woods. I ask what he is looking at, and he just points. I look where he is pointing, and there is a pretty damn near perfect gap in the forest, like trees just didn't grow in this 3 or 4 foot line going straight as an arrow into the forest, so I think it's cool as shit and start walking towards it. He tries to cower it out, but I don't let him. We get to where the trail starts, and he freaks out because there are mushrooms growing down the sides of the trail, like a border for it. I keep walking, but he literally yanks me back to the normal trail by my backpack and refuses to talk about it for the rest of the hike. I went back a few days later and couldn't find it. I assumed I had just missed it, but he says that it was a Fae trail and that it's gone now. I don't know what he is talking about. The standing tree happened right outside of my house. There was a massive thunderstorm the day before, and it had struck a tree about 200 feet from my front door and knocked it over. Not a big deal, I'll get rid of it on the weekend, I thought to myself. The storm stopped for a bit and then continued into the next day. I had to leave for work, and I saw the tree down as I opened my door, and when I turned to lock it, there was another strike near my house. I spun around to see if another tree fell, and the tree that was already down was back up at about 45 degrees, and as I stood there being soaked, it kept going up and just stood up again. I feel like reattached would be a more accurate description. I was already going to be late, so I went to work, and when I got back home, I checked out the tree. I knew it was the same tree because it had bits of bark blown off of it. I'm 100% sure it was the same tree. It had cracks all along where it was broken, and there were still branches on the ground from where it fell. After that it just kept growing. In a few months most of its branches were sprouting again, and it just acted like it didn't ever fall. Those marks are still there, although the tree is now dead. The Whisper Shack is probably the strangest of these stories, and I could go on and on about it. I have some foggy memories of it and some really clear ones too. The first time I found it, I was just wandering around in the woods looking for stuff to shoot with my new BB gun. I come to a small clearing I hadn't been to before, and there is this little shack that could have been there for God knows how long. It was all rotted out and had definitely seen better days. I figured there might be something inside I could use for targets, so I walked up to it. About 50 feet away from it I stopped. I don't remember why, but I know I did, and I had to convince myself to get closer. About 20 feet away I thought I heard someone say my name. I looked around, and there was no one there, and I kept walking. I got to the door and knocked for some reason. From inside I heard someone say, "Who is it?" It sounded like they were right behind the door because it was really quiet, no more than a whisper. So I bolt and get the duck out of Dodge. Because a creepy dude in the forest is not going to be how I die. As I get to the edge of the clearing, I look back, and the door is open, not all the way but kind of like half open, like someone was peeking outside. I don't go looking for it again, but a few years later I was walking in the woods doing other kid shit on summer break. I don't remember exactly what, but I find the shack again, not the clearing but just the shack. It felt like it just appeared there because I didn't notice it at all, and then I was like 30 feet away from it. I walk up to the door, and it's cracked open. I push it all the way open, and it damn near fell off its hinges. I go inside, and it's empty except for a table and a chair. There is an old candle on the table that must have been huge from the amount of wax melted onto the table. As soon as I cross the threshold, it feels like someone is breathing down my neck. I spin around, and there isn't anyone there. It was probably just wind and nerves. I go in and sit on the stool. It was hot and I was tired, and I decide to light the candle because duck fire safety. As I'm sitting there someone whispers in my ear, and I get up and shut the door. I don't remember what I heard or why I shut the door, I just did. And then they sat back down and watched the candle. It burned amazingly bright, lighting the whole shack with a flame that I remember as being enormous. I remember sitting there and hearing some more whispers, but I just can't remember what they said, but all my nerves were gone. I was just relaxing in the glow and warmth of the candle. At some point I remember getting up and sitting back down on the floor. Still watching the candle, then watching the shadows on the wall. They seemed so alive, dancing in time with the flame. It seemed like I spent hours in there. Eventually the whispers told me to get up, but I didn't want to. I sat there for a little longer. They said something else, and I got up, grabbed my coat, and stepped into a cold fall afternoon. I was halfway home before I realized that it was fall, and when I went, I was sure it was summer. I get home, and everything is normal. My father hugged me when he got home, which he never really did. I just kept living a normal life after that. My grades were really good for that trimester. The next time I remember the shack was in 8th grade. I had gotten this book about how to set traps, and I didn't know I needed a license to do it, so I went to set some deadfall traps and the like. I happened upon the same shack again and remembered what happened last time, so I avoided it, and a few days later I was checking those traps, and they weren't where I put them. I had about 10 to 15 set up, and they were all arranged in a large circle-like shape. They weren't like that before, so I took them all down, and when I was looking for the last one, it was right next to the shack. I went inside again, and there was still the table and the stool, but there was no wax and an almost new candle, along with another stool. I remember the whispers coming again, and my nerves died down. I sat on the same stool I did last time. The whispers wanted me to light the candle again, but I didn't. They kept telling me to, but I literally couldn't light the candle. I had my lighter in my hand, but I couldn't move to light the candle. The whispers stayed in that soft and comforting tone, and I wanted to light the candle, but I just couldn't. Then they got angry with me. They stayed whispers, but it was like someone trying to whisper when they are really angry, like my mother scolding me in public or something. I really wanted to light it, but I couldn't do it. I sat down in the corner and cried, like really ducking hard, snot-nosed and just bawling like a child. Well, I was a child, but I was just uncontrollably sobbing. The whispers were quieter in that corner, but they were still angry at me, and I didn't know why. I must have been there in that corner for at least an hour and a half, maybe more. Once or twice I got up and tried to light the candle again but couldn't. I remember whenever I tried to, they were nicer to me, and when I couldn't, they got angry again. I'm tearing up thinking about what they said to me. They stopped asking me to light it and started telling me to, then they berated me, called me names, and told me how bad of a kid I was. They told me things I didn't want to know. They told me things about my parents, about my friends, and about my teachers, stuff that I didn't want to hear, stuff I shouldn't have known. They told me about my parents' divorce, which came later that year, and they told me about my grandfather's death, which happened a year or two later, and many other things that I'd rather not remember, much less mention. Eventually I stopped crying and got up, stumbled out of the door, and went home. It probably took me another 2 hours to get home, stopping to cry more every so many feet. My parents were out for a few days, and I didn't go to school. No one asked questions, and no one changed. I blame a lot of things on that day, but most of all it changed me deeply. I'm a cold person now. I have faced down so many situations that should have affected me without any expression, without any feeling. I've had bouts of depression, but I pulled myself out of them. I've faced down the barrel of loaded guns held by myself and by others. I lost a lot that day. Emotions are probably the worst. I've felt fear very few times since then, happiness even less. I lost a part of me that day. Maybe it was the part that wanted to live. My missing 411 theory. I have come up with the following missing 411 theory to find out what you guys think. I must state that there are multiple reasons for people disappearing, so this theory only covers some of them. Please tell me. What if there is an unknown plant, or a known plant with an ability unknown to us, that releases pollen that, when inhaled by, say, a hiker, causes massive hallucinations and perhaps taps into some primal unknown strength that resides in all of us, like a massive adrenaline rush, that gives us superhuman strength for a period of time. This could explain a man with asthma who suddenly stops, takes off his shoes, and runs back up the mountain he just descended, ultimately exhausting himself to the point of collapse. It could also explain kids who are found at distances that they normally couldn't cover. Covered in scratches, they basically just kept on running through bushes and climbing mountains, without any care for their body or life. I recall a case in which an individual ran to such an extent that the soles of his feet were exposed down to the bone. This could also explain why some people who go missing report feeling unwell. They may have inhaled pollen, which can make them sick, raise their body temperature, cause them to shed their clothes, and lead to hallucinations. The strange stories that people who went missing but reappeared later tell are merely hallucinations induced by the pollen. It might conjure an image of a monster stalking them, which causes them to panic and flee. Any user of the wrong mushrooms will agree that it looked like they were in a totally different dimension, especially a disastrous trip, Just like many of the missing people who returned have said. And perhaps people with disabilities have lower resistance to the pollen and are more affected than healthy people? Tracker dogs that refuse to follow the scent simply smell that dangerous pollen is involved, and their instincts tell them to stay away from it. The perpetrator plant might grow near the waterside, which could explain the water connection. Or perhaps clusters are just places where the plant resides. The same goes for places that have sinister names like Devil's Peak. A plant grows in these places that makes men hallucinate and act like devils or see them. Maybe the berry brushes are the first suspects that should be looked into, or maybe the guilty plant prefers the same habitat in which berry brushes grow. Berry bushes attract lots of wildlife, so growing in their vicinity would greatly increase the plant's chances of infecting another life form. I do not think the plant is able to spread a large cloud of pollen, because then there would be multiple cases with multiple people that disappeared. I think that, to perhaps overcome the weakness of not being able to spread a large cloud of pollen, the plant has mutated its few pollen to induce hallucinating effects on living organisms to increase its survival chance. The heavy storms and rainfall also go hand in hand with this theory, as the plant might get some biological warning that a storm or wind is approaching, or that the air pressure changes, and thus it is the best time to release its pollen so it can affect an unsuspecting animal or human. So why would a plant make another organism run such distances? Perhaps to spread his pollen further away, as other pollen use bees or the wind for this. Perhaps the pollen survives after the body rots away and grows a new plant, or scavengers get infected by eating the body and spread the pollen even further. This theory kind of reminds me of a pretty bad movie I saw once called The Happening, 2008. It is about plants that spread pollen that make people commit suicide. As for why the bodies of missing people are found in places previously searched, it always seems to me that Bigfoots go to great lengths to retrieve the bodies of dead Bigfoots. Perhaps they bury the bodies or have some kind of funeral ritual that they hold in great value. So whenever a Bigfoot stumbles onto the body of a dead hiker, he will place it in the path of the search and rescue team so they can give the body the proper burial it deserves. It is simply out of common respect for the dead. The same goes for kids that are still alive. Maybe the Bigfoot species has found a remedy against the pollen of the plant, and they save the kid from certain death, returning him to his own kind. Maybe the berries that the kids are often fed by fuzzy or hairy men they tell of contain the antibodies to counter the devil's pollen. It is a known fact that sweets and sugars counter the effects of hallucinating drugs. A sobering coincidence?